Chapter 207. Haotian was the supreme and the only faith in this world. Countless believers in the world devoutly worshipped the Haotian Taoism temples all over the world with their spirit and money. The Divine Hall located in the Peach Mountain of West Hill was the supreme center that influenced and even controlled these temples and the secular imperial power. The West Hill Divine Palace was led by the Hierarch Lord, and the affairs of the Haotian Taoism were managed by three great divine priests. These three great divine priests were extremely powerful and dignified, so they were called great gods. The three gods were the great divine priest of revelation, the great divine priest of judgment, and the great divine priest of light. Among them, the great divine priest of judgment was in charge of adjudicating heresy and arresting the remnants of the devil's doctrine. There were countless strong men under his command. He was the most powerful and had the most power on the surface. The great divine priest of revelation was in charge of comprehending the will of Haotian. He edited the classics and controlled all the Taoist temples in the world with the seven fun calligraphy. He had a great influence in the secular world. The great divine priest of light was the most special existence among the three gods. He did not have specific distribution of Haotian Taoism's affairs, but he had the power to touch all the affairs of Haotian Taoism. That was because anyone who could become the great divine priest of light must be the most proficient in the doctrine of the Divine Hall, with the strongest belief and the most sensitive to the darkness of the world. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light brought a certain tomes of arcane into the wilderness to preach. It could be said that he bore the most arduous and important historical mission of Haotian Taoism. One could imagine his status. No one knew why the great divine priest of light gave up Haotian's divine favor and created his own sect. He created a devil's doctrine in the world and fought against Haotian Taoism until today. Even though it was severely suppressed by the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still not defeated. One could imagine how powerful it was. The successive great divine priests of light of the West Hill Divine Palace were all great figures. Therefore, although there was no ranking within the Divine Hall, the great divine priest of light was the head of the three gods, just below the hierarch. Over the years, there were occasionally letters of authorization issued in the name of the three divine priests of West Hill. However, no one outside of Peach Mountain knew that the respected great divine priest of light was imprisoned by the Divine Hall in the secluded prison at the foot of Peach Mountain. Moreover, he had been imprisoned for 14 years. The middle-aged priest kneeling in front of the wooden fence could hardly suppress the excitement in his heart. Over the years, he was the only one in the world who often saw the old man behind the wooden fence, but every time he saw him, he was as excited as the first time he saw the old man. Now, he was the most trusted subordinate of the great divine priest of judgment. Even the two priests, Yi Hongyu and Prince Long Qing, would not underestimate him. However, no matter how high his status was, as long as he walked into the dim Yu prison and came to the wooden fence, he felt as if he was still the young man who had just come to Peach Mountain from the Song Taoist Temple in the East Sea, and the old man behind the fence was still the high-status and beloved great divine priest of light. The middle-aged priest believed in Haotian and yearned for the light. He was willing and only willing to devote all his love and reverence to the old man who had guided him onto the bright path, even at the cost of his life and soul. The old man looked at the middle-aged divine priest calmly. The wrinkles on his face were as dense as the wood grain on the fence. The expression on his face was extremely gentle. There was no trace of the wisdom and majesty of the great divine priest of light in the past. The middle-aged priest touched his forehead to the ground and said softly, "The great divine priest of judgment asked, so I came to see you." The old man said, "Even if you don't come to see me, I still want to see you." The middle-aged priest was shocked and said in a trembling voice, "Great divine priest, what did you see?" The old man slowly turned around and looked out from the tiny glass hole in the room. Outside the hole was a deep fog and no sunlight could be seen, but he knew that it was the north. The holy light in the old man's sunken eye sockets gradually dissipated. The black pupil was strangely enlarged and occupied the entire eyeball, looking like a transparent black jade without a speck of dust. I saw the shadow of the night appear in Chang and City. Hearing this, the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the wooden fence trembled. The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years, was still the great divine priest of light. Every word he said naturally had its own reason. For the middle-aged divine priest, there was almost no difference from the will of Haotian. The great divine priest of light did not have the ability to predict the operation of all things in the world. That was the God-given ability of the great divine priest of revelation. But as a priest with the purest and firmest Taoist heart and light in every hair and drop of blood, he had a very special ability to see the real darkness of the world. Many years ago, he once saw the shadow of the night floating from the wilderness to the Tang Empire. It was because he firmly believed in this that the West Hill Divine Palace did so many things in that powerful empire in the north at all costs. However, it was very strange that because of that incident, he, who had a high position in the Divine Hall, was instantly beaten down to the dust. Facing the wrath of the Hierarch Lord, especially the gaze of the Taoist in indigo, as powerful as he was and as intelligent as he was, he could not do anything to resist. Thus, he became an unknown prisoner in the foothills of Peach Mountain. The middle-aged priest asked for instructions in a trembling voice. This matter should be reported to the great divine priest of judgment, no, the Hierarch Lord. The old man looked at him with a smile and shook his head, saying, "This hall," with a faint sigh, the dust on the fence flew up. "And the temple at the back of the hall, it has already fallen and decayed." The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years for no reason, had the right to coldly criticize the divine hall and even the Taoist temple. However, although the middle-aged priest respected him, he did not dare to reply. He raised his head and after a moment of confusion, he could not hide his excitement and said in a trembling voice, "Are you leaving?" The old man looked at him quietly. His sunken eye sockets had returned to their original state, and the holy radiance made his eyes look indifferent and hollow. His dry lips trembled slightly, and he said emotionlessly, "You will die. Many people will die. There are many people in the divine hall like me who are willing to give up their lives." The middle-aged priest did not hesitate and said firmly, "For the light to come to the world." After being imprisoned for 14 years, he finally decided to escape the prison of the divine hall because of the darkness he saw. The old man quietly looked at the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the fence. It was as if he was seeing the young Taoist priest whose eyes were full of awe and worship many years ago. The wrinkles on his face became deeper and deeper, filled with compassion and compassion. One night, the old man got up and walked to the row of seemingly loose and low wooden fences. He quietly looked at the fence and looked at it for a long time, which he had accompanied for 5,000 days and nights. Then he said one sentence, "I have no confinement in my heart. How can the confinement stop me? My Taoist heart is bright. How can the light stop me?" After saying this, the old man reached out and pushed the wooden fence. His action was ordinary and casual, as if he was not trying to get rid of the years of confinement, but just wanted to leave home and push open the creaking wooden door. The old man's fingers touched the wooden fence. The wooden fence silently broke into powder and turned into countless shining dust particles that drifted everywhere. Then, like a group of fireflies, they drilled out of the small stone hole. The great divine priest of judgment, who was quietly sitting on the South Sea seat of heavenly black jade with his hand supporting his chin, suddenly stiffened. Two tiny specks of light suddenly appeared in his majestic eyes that were as deep as the sea. Puff! Thick blood spurted from his lips and dripped on the dark red divine robe. The fireflies drilled out of the small stone hole and entered the night fog. Like pouring oil into a fire, they ignited everything around them, especially the tiny particles in the haze. The dark valley that had never seen light suddenly burned. This kind of burning had no heat or destructive power, only brightness. The burning mountain fog instantly spread up to the south of Peach Mountain and among the Taoist temples. In the deep night, the whole Peach Mountain was burning. Especially the divine Hall of Light, in which Taoist chanting echoed, solemn and compassionate, shining. At the highest point of Peach Mountain, there was a pure white divine hall. A thunder-like roar sounded in the divine hall. With the thunder-like roar, the invisible flame between Peach Mountain was gradually extinguished. The roar in the highest divine hall gradually became lower. The ending sound was lingering. The ending sound was faint. There was an island far away in the southeast. The storm in this ocean was more terrible than in the storm sea. No fishing boats or merchant ships had ever come here. There had never been human footprints on this island before. A skinny Taoist dressed in green stood on a high reef. The terrible waves kept hitting the bottom of the reef, making a thunder-like sound. The island was shaking, but he seemed to feel nothing. The Taoist in indigo quietly looked at the depths of the ocean, watching the hot fog that was evaporated by the lava of the underwater volcano. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look at the distant land that he could not see. After a long time, the Taoist in indigo sighed and shook his head. That night, 14 divine priests in Peach Mountain turned into ashes in the light. That night, a total of 300 people from the Divine Hall of Light were executed. That night, the great Divine Priest of Light, who had been imprisoned for 14 years, successfully escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace. He was the first prisoner in history to leave the U prison behind Peach Mountain alive. Dusk was the warmest time in the wilderness in winter. The red sunset hanging over the long grass in the distance emitted the last light of the day. Although it could not melt the snow, it could add some redness to the cheeks of travelers. The sound of arrows whistling and heavy objects falling sounded in the wilderness. People in the camp heard Catgirl's surprised shout from afar, "Senior brother, your archery is so good." Someone went to clean up the prey. Ning Kai fed the big black horse and was ready to rest for a while. When he passed by the carriage, he found Mo Shanshan beside the window, concentrating on writing in the last afterglow. "Be careful of hurting your eyes." He stood beside the window and said kindly. Mo Shanshan looked up at him coldly, as if he was air. Ning Kai had been in the wilderness for some days and found that the girl was so proud that she never looked at him directly. He was a little unhappy and thought that he did not even care about the pride of the Tang princess. How could he be defeated by her? So he did not bother to look at her directly. He leaned against the window and squinted to see her writing. His eyes did not fall on the paper, but on her face. He found that her slightly round face was full of concentration and forgetfulness. Ning Kai agreed that she was the most beautiful when she was serious. Once he picked up the brush, he often forgot everything around him. So when he saw the girl concentrating on writing calligraphy, his impression of her inevitably improved. "I didn't know that you are a guy who is obsessed with books. Your writing is quite similar to my style." The young men of the Great River Kingdom were doing physical work, putting up tents and nailing stakes. Zhuo Zhihua and other female disciples were piling firewood to make a fire and cooking. Hearing Ning Kai's comments, they did not know why they laughed. They covered their mouths and looked at Ning Kai, but did not say why they laughed. Ning Kai was a little embarrassed. To cover up this embarrassment, he looked up at the sky and found that a few grain-sized stars appeared on the edge of the wilderness, looking at the sunset across the sky. He subconsciously sighed, "There is still no moon." Inside the window, Mo Shanshan put down the brush on the inkstone and followed his gaze. She asked dully, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Ning Kai was slightly startled and thought of something. A smile gradually appeared on his cheek. Mo Shanshan looked at his side face through the window. The breeze on the wilderness blew his hair, and a lovely little dimple vaguely appeared. She suddenly found that this guy's smile at this time was so sincere and sincere. Suddenly, Ning Ke put his palm on the window and his body swept up and disappeared. A light sound came from the top of the horse carriage. Mo Shanshan looked up and did not understand what it meant. In the wind of the wilderness, Ning Ke stood on the top of the horse carriage and looked at the smoke gradually rising under the round sunset in the distance. He gradually frowned and put his hand between his lips to blow a sharp whistle. The camp suddenly became quiet, and the war horses began to stir. Accompanied by the setting sun, Sang Sang ate noodles with fried eggs alone with relish. There was not a single green onion in the noodles because she did not like to eat green onion. The reason why she used to put green onion was that someone liked it. She put on Chinjinji Cosmetics Store's powder in front of the mirror alone, and there would not be someone who always laughed at her. She slept alone, rolling from left to right and from right to left. The bed seemed much bigger. On the bed, she kicked her legs and stretched her arms as she wanted. She no longer worried about who she would kick or hit. Living alone in Chang'an City was very comfortable, but also very uncomfortable. Sang Sang lay on the bed and looked at the tree outside the window. She looked at the stars in the leaves and wondered why there was still no moon. What was the moon that the young master mentioned? Where was the young master at this time? Maybe because the bed suddenly became bigger, and she was not used to it, Sang Sang did not sleep well all night like the previous days. She tossed and turned until dawn. She got up with a yawn and rubbed her face. She pushed the door open and went to the alley to buy a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup. Then she sat on the threshold of the old brush pen shop. In the bright light of the early morning, she ate alone, tasteless. It was noisy at Yangguan, the southernmost part of the Tang Empire. Countless caravans were waiting to enter the country. There was an ordinary horse carriage lined up according to the rules. In the carriage, there was an old man with withered hair and deep eyes resting. He opened his eyes and looked to the distant Chang'an City in the north. His eyes were full of gentle and dignified light. Corrected a small mistake, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 208. The Southern Gate Temple at the foot of the imperial city was quiet, even a little lonely. Taoists and nuns walked quietly, occasionally looking up at the young Taoist standing outside the temple, and then quickly lowering their heads. The young Taoist was holding a yellow umbrella under his arm, and his face was calm and gentle. He was He Mingqi, the first disciple of the nation master of Tang. Everyone in the Southern Gate Temple knew that He Mingqi was a gentle and kind person. However, for someone of his status to personally guard the door, one could imagine how important the conversation in the temple was. No one dared to make a sound and disturb him. Deep in the temple, there were two beautiful cotton cushions on the black wooden board. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei and said slowly, "Senior brother, that person should be coming to Chang'an." In front of the emperor and his respected senior brother, Li Qingshan would habitually return to his playful appearance. However, today his expression was extremely serious, and there was a hint of serious inquiry on his face. Master Yen Sei took a deep look at him, and there was no usual wretchedness in his deep-set eyes, but some hidden sadness. He said indifferently, "It was not easy for the great divine priest to escape from that dark place. Why does he come to Chang'an? Who is he looking for, or is he courting death?" Li Qingshan smiled bitterly and said, "The great divine priest of light of the divine hall, the second most powerful person in Peach Mountain. Such a person, even if he comes to Chang'an to court death, he will surely shock the whole world." After a moment of silence, Master Yen Sei said, "The reason. I want to know why he comes." Li Qingshan took out a very thin letter from his arms, and put it on the black floor. He said, "According to the speculation of the Hierarch Lord, it should be related to the thing that happened 14 years ago." Master Yen Sei slightly frowned, and did not continue this topic. It seemed that even the two brothers did not want to talk about the thing that happened 14 years ago. "What does this letter say?" when he escaped from the divine hall, he used some means to easily push down the confinement. The great divine priest of judgment's Taoist heart was tied to the confinement, and he was badly injured by the backfire. Other divine priests and Taoists were also killed or injured. The temple has deduced that he will come to the empire, so they hope that we can capture or kill him at all costs. Li Qingshan noticed that his senior brother's eyes seemed to sink deeper after hearing this. He paused for a while and continued in a low voice. The letter also said that the great divine priest of revelation has led the masters of the Revelation Institute to the border ahead of time. As long as the imperial court agrees, they are willing to come to Chang'an City to assist us. If it weren't for the fact that the judicial department was injured and most of its power was invested in the wilderness, the Revelation Institute wouldn't have to deal with this matter. However, I really didn't expect that my old friend, who had been imprisoned for so many years, was still alive. Instead, he seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. If it weren't for the current situation, with his ability, he might really be able to find the hand scroll of the tomes of arcane for the divine hall. It was hard to tell whether Master Yen Sei was praising or sighing. Hearing the words, tomes of arcane, Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "The wilderness is already in turmoil, but the hand scroll has been lost for a long time. Perhaps it is not even in the desolate man's tribe. Therefore, all parties only send the younger generation to try to find it. Senior brother, if your old friend reappears in the world, he will be much more important than the other side." Master Yen Sei shook his head and did not continue to discuss this issue. He asked, "What did His Majesty say?" At the beginning of His Majesty's ascension to the throne, when the imperial court was handing over to the man did such a thing in Chang'an City. His Majesty had long wanted him dead. But His Majesty's attitude was very clear. Even if he had to be killed, it could only be done by the Empire itself. People from the Divine Hall were absolutely not allowed to enter the country and intervene. Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei and said after a moment of silence, "Senior brother, you were very close to him at that time. You'd better leave this matter to me." Master Yen Sei shook his head and said expressionlessly, "Since it is a matter of Haotian Taoism, there is no reason to ask the Academy for help. But it is impossible to kill him with the power of the South School and the Imperial Center administration." Li Qingshan said, "You can't judge things in the world only by impressions. Nothing is impossible." Master Yen Sei looked at him and said directly, "He used to be stronger than you. I believe he is stronger now than before." Li Qingshan smiled and said, "There were several very interesting stories recorded in the Huayang market of the South School. There was once a knowing destiny grand cultivator from the South Jin Kingdom who was traveling in the Great River Kingdom. As a result, he was killed by a rascal who was greedy for money." Master Yen Sei knew what he wanted to express and could not help frowning. Li Qingshan filled the teacup in front of his senior brother and said with a smile, "Although I am not talented, I also entered the knowing destiny realm many years ago. As the nation master of Tang, I am much stronger than that rascal." Above the great god's throne and under the firmament, Master Yen Sei looked at Li Qingshan and said slowly, "Junior brother, you have to remember this sentence. Anyone who can sit on the 3 great divine thrones in the Peach Mountain is qualified to stand under the firmament and overlook the secular world. In Haotian Taoism, the hierarch's position is the most noble. But in terms of Taoist heart cultivation, the hierarch is not necessarily much stronger than the 3 great divine thrones. But the person you are determined to kill is the great divine priest of light, who is known for his wisdom and Taoist heart." Li Qingshan smiled and said nothing more. Yen Sei knew that he did not really listen to these words. He could not help but sigh in the bottom of his heart. Thinking of the temperament of his old friend, he shook his head and said, "Do your best. If it is not easy, don't worry about it. All the fate, Haotian will arrange it." After Li Qingshan left, Master Yen Sei sat on the black wooden floor and was in a daze for a long time. His old and thin body looked more lonely against the cold pillars and floor. After a long time, he picked up the cold tea in front of him, dipped his finger in the tea, and wrote a word on the floor. Then he reached out his hand to the greasy and dirty Taoist robe and wiped it clean. Then he got up and left. The tea marks on the black wooden floor gradually disappeared, leaving only some very light water stains. If you looked carefully, you could vaguely see that it should be the word chaos. The old man's name was Wei Guangming. It was not because the old man was the great divine priest of light. In fact, more than 80 years ago, shortly after he was born, he got such a name when he was still a baby. After having this name for decades, he became the great divine priest of light and enjoyed the love and awe of millions of believers in the world. At that time, he understood that it was not only a drink and a peck, but also a name contained the will of heaven. If Hao Yin did not make a choice before he was born, how could his parents, who had been farmers for generations in the kingdom of Song, take out such a name? As the most respected great divine priest of light of Hao Yin Taoism, although the old man had been imprisoned for more than 10 years, there were still countless priests and powerhouses in the divine hall who were willing to sacrifice everything for him. There were also countless loyal subordinates in various Taoist temples in the world. Now that he had escaped from the Fan prison at the foot of Peach Mountain, there were naturally people who helped him to come to Chang'an quietly. Getting off the carriage outside the great city, the old man walked along the deep and thick south gate. With drooping eyes and bent body, he slowly walked forward on the stone road. Suddenly, he seemed to feel something. The moment his right foot stepped on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, it slightly stiffened, and then he took it back and turned to the east. In the eyes of the passers-by, the old man was just a little inconvenient in his legs. They did not notice anything strange, nor did they know that at the moment when the old man's right foot was about to step on the street, the vermilion bird painting deeply engraved on the stone ground far away from the Vermilion Bird Avenue slowly opened its eyes. After a long time, the eyes of the vermilion bird painting slowly closed again. What a big array! The old man smiled and thought to himself as he walked slowly on the streets of the East City with his hands behind his back. After a while, the old man slowly walked beside a well in an alley. His indifferent and muddy eyes fell on a withered yellow leaf beside the well, and his brows gradually furrowed. The leaf was withered and yellow, and the veins were still there. It looked normal, but in the eyes of the old man, it was extremely unusual. In his eyes that could see all the darkness in the world, all the sceneries, street scenes, and life in the city seemed to be covered with a very thin layer of gauze. It did not cover the truth, but covered the fate that circulated between heaven and earth. The old man walked to the inconspicuous inn at the end of the alley with his hands behind his back. He shook his head and thought with emotion, what a big array! The big array of Chang'an City had not been activated, but it had already covered the mystery of heaven, so that the old man could not see the dark shadow that he had been chasing for 14 years. However, the big array that made him admire and vigilant did not find out that he was a peerless powerhouse from the West Hill, and did not give any warning. Because he was not the great divine priest of light now. He had restrained all his aura and ability, and even completely forgotten his Taoist heart. Now he was just a very ordinary skinny old man. He picked an ordinary inn to stay in. In the following days, he walked around Chang'an City with his hands behind his back and his body hunched. He went to some ordinary places of interest, went to some ordinary markets, ordered some ordinary dishes, drank some ordinary fragrant jasmine, and listened to some ordinary folk songs. He spent some ordinary winter time like the most ordinary old man in Chang'an City. Until the winter gradually came and the coldness became stronger, he went to buy an ordinary thick cotton-padded jacket. An ordinary old man did not need too much sleep. One morning, he got up when the sky was just bright. He wandered around casually and came across a stall selling hot and sour noodle slice soup. He smelled the fragrance and bought a bowl. When he left, someone knocked over the front of his cotton-padded jacket. A little girl came over with a food box and looked at the embarrassed old man expressionlessly. She pulled out a big towel from her sleeve like a magic trick and wiped the stain for him. Then she bought another bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup for him. The old man thanked her, but she shook her head, indicating that there was no need. Then she left with the food box. The old man was stunned. He handed the bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup in his hand to an old beggar from the Yen kingdom who was thinner than him. Then he followed the little girl from a distance. The old man followed the little girl to an alley called Lin 47th Street and saw a small shop called Old Brush Pen Shop. He watched the little girl working hard in the shop for a whole day. The more the old man looked at her, the more he felt that the little girl was fresh and delightful. She was extremely clean from her appearance to her temperament, like an absolutely transparent glass bead. As long as there was a little sunshine, it would definitely shine brightly. The little girl's skin was a little dark, but it was also so clean and bright. So the great divine priest of light from West Hill stood in Lin 47th Street and couldn't help admiring her with joy. It's been a long time. Brothers and sisters, I'm tired. I've had 10 days off. I'm not qualified to complain, so I can only talk about my thoughts. There are some problems with the internet at home, so I haven't been online these days. I'm a few days late. I sincerely wish everyone a happy new year and a healthy family. Finally, a more sincere thank you. Finally, I must add that I haven't updated for 10 days. I just entered the upload password for half an hour. Half an hour. I'm so, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 209. In the following days, the great divine priest of light, disguised as an ordinary old man in Chang'an, went to the inn, ate, slept, enjoyed the scenery, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. Every day, he would stroll around the Lin 47th Street and see Sang Sang. He saw Sang Sang when he ate, slept, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. He went to see Sang Sang every day. After finding out the name of the skinny little handmaiden in the old brush pen shop, seeing Sang Sang became the most important part of his life. One day, the old man came to the Lin 47th Street again with 2 bags of osmanthus cakes from the Farong store. Seeing the little handmaiden being picked up by a royal carriage, he could not help but feel curious, but did not think much about it. Looking at the closed door of the old brush pen shop and not seeing Sang Sang's busybody, the old man felt something was missing and regretful. After standing there for a while, he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten the real purpose of coming to Chang'an. The shadow of the dark night had long disappeared from the old man's eyes. He did not know where that person was hiding in Chang'an or whether he was still in Chang'an. He had even completely forgotten about it these days. Standing on the gray wall of the Lin 47th Street, he thought of it and shook his head. He put the osmanthus cakes in front of the old brush pen shop and tightened his dirty thick cotton-padded jacket. Then he passed through the cobweb-like streets of the eastern city and came to a quiet mansion in the southern city. 2 large locust trees stood quietly at the entrance of the alley. Their leaves fluttered weakly in the winter wind. Compared to the lofty trees peeking out from the houses on both sides of the alley, they looked a little shabby. There were 2 mansions facing each other in the middle of the alley. The old man did not pay attention to the mansion on his right, but looked directly to his left. The broken seal had long been torn clean by the wind, leaving only some scraps of paper mixed in between the peeling paint of the wooden door. It looked extremely dilapidated. The old man stood quietly in front of the shabby mansion gate with his hands behind his back and his body bent. He looked at the remaining stone lion and the old mud that had accumulated behind the base of the stone lion. An indescribable emotion appeared in his sunken eyes. The old man stood there for a long time until a gust of winter wind blew in from the entrance of the alley and entered the collar of his thick cotton-padded jacket. He coughed a few times and his body bent even lower. A voice came along with the winter wind. The winter in Chang, and this year is much colder than before. The old man still stooped and replied, I haven't been to Chang and city for many years, so I don't know what the winter in Chang and city was like before. Then, he turned to look at the entrance of the alley. A man walked slowly from the entrance of the alley. His eyebrows were straight like a ruler and his eyes were bright like a spring. He wore a cotton Taoist robe and a simple Taoist bun. He carried a long sword on his back and wore a pair of straw sandals. Every step he took was like a dragon or a tiger. The fallen leaves and mud in front of him seemed to be afraid of his power. They moved even though there was no wind and moved to the sides of the alley. It was the great Tang Empire's nation advisor, Li Qingshan. You can stay in Chang and for the next few years. Maybe you will have a deeper understanding of the winter here. Li Qingshan stopped and looked at the old man. He wanted to keep the guest. If he was a real guest, the Tang Empire would have good tea and wine to entertain him. If he came uninvited and had years of resentment, the so-called keep the guest meant something else. The old man looked at him quietly and slowly straightened up. His stooped and thin body suddenly became tall and mighty with a simple straightening movement. A sense of solemnity and wisdom gushed out. Facing the nation master of Tang, the old man was no longer the ordinary old man who drank tea, ate and looked at Sang Sang. He was the great divine priest of light. The leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism, the nation master of Tang, and almost all the people's imagination about power could be given to Li Qingshan. No one had seen him in a wonderful state these years. Because of his extraordinary status, there was really nothing that he needed to do in person. But even the children playing in the streets of Chang and city knew that the nation master was naturally very powerful. Otherwise, how could he become the nation master? For people in the cultivation world, the nation master of Tang Li Qingshan was a master in the knowing destiny state. Once he made a move, he would definitely cause a storm. However, the old man in front of the dilapidated general's mansion was not an ordinary person. As the most respected great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace, he still had countless loyal subordinates after being imprisoned for 14 years. Even the hierarch did not dare to kill him. Once he made a move, he caused chaos in the Divine Hall and was the first person in history to successfully escape from the U prison. The nation master of Tang was facing the great divine priest of light. No one knew who would win. The West Hill sent a letter saying that you are very powerful. My senior brother also said that you are very powerful. He even said that you may be more powerful than the hierarch. Looking at the great divine priest of light, Li Qingshan suddenly smiled and said, I know that because my mind is preoccupied with secular affairs, I can't keep my Taoist heart calm, so I always have some regrets in the realm. So if you are really stronger than me, I don't think it is difficult to accept, and I won't think it is a shame. The great divine priest of light said, After so many years of cultivation, if I still can't see through this, I will inevitably be a little stupid. So I can't see through you. Li Qingshan stopped smiling and said, You are different from the two great divine priests of judgment and revelation. Back then, my senior brother and I never saw a trace of ambition for power in you. You didn't even seem to have much interest in the glory of Haotian in the human world. You studied the scriptures hard. You saved people in trouble. You were compassionate but not compassionate. You were indifferent but not interested in indifference. You were almost a completely transparent or bright person. Li Qingshan's voice gradually became cold. He said, So I don't understand why you suddenly became such a person. You would do such a thing and become the first great divine priest of light to be imprisoned in the divine hall. I also don't understand why you still came to Chang and after escaping. What do you want to do? All things and laws in the world are determined by Haotian. Our position in the world has long been determined. My position is above the divine priest of light. My mission is to see the darkness. That's all. After a short pause, the great divine priest of light looked up at the messy sky behind the messy branches above the courtyard wall. A trace of compassionate smile appeared on his face. He continued to say, "If everyone knew their position and mission, everything in the world would be much simpler. When I saw the darkness, it should have been purified by judgment. However, no one was willing to complete their mission, so I had to do more." He withdrew his gaze and looked at Li Qingshan. He said, "Whether you see it or not, the darkness is always there. But since I saw it, I really can't pretend that I didn't see it." Li Qingshan shook his head and said, "If all things and laws in the world are determined by Haotian, then why do we still need to cultivate and seek? Where the darkness is, it will be purified by Haotian. You just need to complete your mission in your position. Why do you still need to do these things? If you could really know your position and mission, you should still be the great divine priest of light sitting on the divine throne and being worshipped by all people. How could you become a stray dog that everyone wants to kill?" The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan looked at his old face and thought of the benevolent old man who painstakingly studied the scriptures in the divine hall many years ago. His heart was filled with mixed feelings of sympathy and disgust. He sighed and said, "All the great divine priests of light are the most intelligent people in Haotian Taoism. But I don't know why the great divine priest of light is the most prone to problems. The more outstanding one is, the more so. The one who preached in the wilderness more than 1,000 years ago, and the one who disappeared in the South Sea 600 years ago. You are also the same. Why? I often wonder if it's because people like you, who have great wisdom and perseverance, have great confidence that you insist that what you see is the truth, and that it's the only truth, so you walk further and further away from the real truth?" Listening to these sincere words, the great divine priest of light was silent for a long time. He seemed to have some emotions, but after a moment, his expression became calm and indifferent. He said, "What you see is what you see. What you see in the eyes of light is the objective existence of the world. Falsehood is also the truth." Hearing his words, Li Qingshan could not help but be slightly angry. He said in a low voice, "But no one will think so except you. 14 years ago, you faked the hierarch's edict and let Li Peiyan and Xiahou do this. His Majesty was angry, and so was the hierarch. If you did not want to be the enemy of the whole world, how could the world treat you as its enemy? How could His Majesty and the hierarch think you should die at the same time? You are so virtuous and respected, how could you be locked up for so many years?" The great divine priest of light said, "I did not fake the edict of the chief monk." Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "You mean the hierarch used you as a scapegoat?" The great divine priest of light's tone became calmer and calmer. He said, "Who has the guts to use me as a scapegoat?" After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan said, "But this thing was done by you after all. Yes. Have you ever considered the thoughts of His Majesty and the hierarch? What does the thoughts of the Tang Emperor and the chief monk have to do with me?" The great divine priest of light's voice was as calm as the frozen surface of a lake in winter, smooth and without any ripples or traces, as if the disaster he had caused that shocked the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace was just a trivial matter. Li Qingshan looked at him coldly and asked, "You came to Chang and after getting out of trouble. Have you not let go of that thing?" The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan turned to look at the dilapidated general's mansion and sighed. "So many innocent people have died in Chang, and just because of what you said back then. This general's mansion has deteriorated to this extent thanks to you. Are you still not satisfied?" The great divine priest of light said expressionlessly, "Not satisfied." Li Qingshan pointed at the general's mansion and scolded harshly, "All the people in the general's mansion are dead. What else are you dissatisfied with?" The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, "No, there is still one who is not dead. Li Qingshan's pupils shrank slightly and he was extremely shocked. At that time, both the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire's princes and generals agreed to cooperate with me because no one wanted to see the son of Yama come to the world. However, after that, everyone thought that what I saw was fake. Your princes thought that I had bewitched them, and your emperor was extremely angry. So even though some people knew that there was still one person alive in this general's mansion, they were not willing to continue the investigation and even forbade talking about it. Why was I imprisoned for 14 years? Because I knew that the son of Yama was still in this world and was becoming more and more powerful. I wanted to continue looking for him, but those people did not believe in the son of Yama and his existence. If I continued to investigate, there would be a big problem between the West Hill and the Tang Empire. Then some people had to lock me up. He said slowly with a sad mood, Peach Mountain, the Tang Empire, the whole world has decayed. It is not that I want to be the enemy of the whole world, but the whole world is the companion of the dark night and the enemy of the light. I am the great divine priest of light. I am Wei Guangming. Then the whole world is my enemy. I don't want to use the name of chaos in Chang'an anymore. The name of this chapter is more relevant. This is really a big drama. There will be a volume called The Year of the Curtain, which is probably the third last volume. Recently, I have been at home in Hubei, so I can only keep the update like this for the time being. First, the quality is guaranteed, then the quantity is guaranteed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 210. In the previous chapters, I confused the Ming hand scroll with the Ri hand scroll. I will correct it when I get home. Sorry, thank you for reminding me. Who were those people? Who didn't believe in the legend of the son of Yama? Who could change the Divine Hall's attitude? Who could make the Tang Empire wait quietly? Who could make the great divine priest of light fall into the dust with one word? Li Qingshan's body suddenly stiffened as the image of an old temple on a quiet mountain appeared in his mind. Many years ago, when the West Hill Divine Palace gave him the title of Great Divine Priest, he once went to the old temple. This was the only time in his life, but it was unforgettable. Thinking of this, he seemed to see the thin figure on the edge of the cliff again, and his whole body was slightly cold. The Great Divine Priest of Light said, I don't know what the Abbey Dean was thinking at that time. I respect him from the bottom of my heart, but I will still stick to my own ideas. Li Qingshan looked at his old cheeks in silence. Only then did he know that it was the Taoist in indigo who personally imprisoned him as the Great Divine Priest of Light. Then he thought of the Great Divine Priest of Light who could stick to his own ideas in front of the Taoist in indigo. He could not help but feel great admiration. Because I stick to it, I will not give up. The light in the Great Divine Priest of Light's eyes was calm and deep. He said slowly, During these years of being imprisoned in the back of Peach Mountain, I have never stopped looking at the world with this pair of eyes. One year, I even tried it once. Li Qingshan frowned and said, The Yen Territory murder case? The Great Divine Priest of Light did not answer directly, but said indifferently, Unfortunately, I still failed to kill that person. I clearly saw that the shadow of the night was still floating in the world, sometimes thick and sometimes faint, sometimes disappearing and sometimes appearing. But during these 2 years, the shadow became more and more solid, which means that person is becoming more and more powerful. Li Qingshan asked with a serious expression, Who is the person you saw with your eyes? Is he in Chang'an? The Great Divine Priest of Light gave a very obscure answer. The eyes can only see his existence, but not his existence. One day, I saw him appear in Chang'an, so I was very anxious, so I wanted to come to Chang'an. Although he said that he was worried, the expression on the old man's face was still calm, without a hint of anxiety. Li Qingshan was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking about what the headmaster had said. Finally, he shook his head slowly but firmly and said, The legend is just a legend. No one has ever discovered the underworld. The headmaster has been traveling around the world for many years. I heard that the Abbey Dean is also traveling in the south. They must also be looking for the underworld. After so many years, even the two of them have not found the underworld, so it can't be real. If there is no netherworld, there will be no netherworld king. If there is no netherworld king, there will be no son of netherworld king. The great divine priest of light said, "Of course there is the underworld, so there is naturally Yama." Li Qingshan stared into his eyes through the winter wind in the alley and asked, "Where's the underworld?" The great divine priest of light said calmly, "I don't know." Li Qingshan asked, "Then how can you conclude that there is an underworld?" The great divine priest of light replied, "Because there is, so there is." Li Qingshan suddenly felt like he had returned to the fragrance workshop many years ago, when he met the crown prince who was more shameless than himself. Other than beating him up, there was no way for him to have a normal conversation. The great divine priest of light looked at his expression and smiled. He said, "The Ming hand scroll has records about the underworld invasion and the existence of the acuteness Yama. But 1,000 years ago, the Ming hand scroll was taken to the wilderness by that ancestor and was lost. No one has ever seen it, so it was gradually forgotten and even became a legend." Li Qingshan frowned and said, "But you haven't seen the Ming hand scroll either." "It's true that I didn't have the opportunity to see the original Ming hand scroll. But don't forget that ancestor and I are both great divine priests of light. Some records will always be passed down in an indescribable way." Li Qingshan looked at him and shook his head. He sighed and said, "Great divine priest, have you ever thought that just because of your own illusion and a legend, you gave up everything and became the enemy of the whole world?" The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, "With a bright Taoist heart, what you see is what you believe. Then you naturally have to believe what you see. As long as you believe, then the illusion is often true." After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan took a step forward. A very light airflow splashed up where his straw sandals landed. It was like a stone falling into a still lake, making circles of ripples. Only Haotian can see everything in the world, and see all the truth with one glance. Although you sit on the great divine priest's throne and are under the sky, you are a human, not a god, not even heaven. The great divine priest of light's gaze fell on Li Qingshan's right foot. There was no emotional fluctuation in his voice. He said indifferently, "Because I am not a god or Haotian, so you don't believe me?" "Yes." Li Qingshan's right hand that was exposed from his sleeve was extremely delicate. It held nothing and trembled slightly, as if he was clutching a struggling dragon. Meanwhile, the sword in the sheath on his back thrummed like the dragon was about to emerge from its body. "Even if you are a god, there is still a god-stunning array in Chang'an." The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, "The god-stunning array will not be interested in an old man like me." Li Qingshan took another step forward. The long sword in the sheath roared louder and louder, and the grip of the dragon in his right hand became firmer. He looked at the old face of the great divine priest of light and said in a low voice, "I know you will come here to see, so I let the south gate set up a Tianluo array around. I want to see if I can keep you here." "No." The great divine priest of light said, "Even the confinement of judgment can't trap me, let alone the Tianluo array." Li Qingshan said, "The Tianluo array is a divine array given by Haotian. Is it not comparable to the confinement of the great divine priest of judgment?" The great divine priest of light replied, "The confinement traps the heart, while the Tianluo traps the body. It is naturally more difficult for the heart to escape than the body." Li Qingshan was silent for a while and agreed with this judgment. He said, "The god-stunning array will not be activated because of you. But if you want to escape, you must display all the aura of your state. At that time, the array will have a way to subdue you." The great divine priest of light said calmly, "I am just an ordinary old man in Chang'an." Li Qingshan said, "Because I am here, You can't always pretend to be an ordinary old man. The great divine priest of light looked at the master of Tang who was slowly approaching him, and smiled. He said, Qingshan, you are a person with a great lucky chance. When you were young, you met the Emperor of Tang and were respected in the secular world. Then you were chosen by the elder Taoists in the temple. You easily entered the knowing destiny state and were favored by the Emperor. However, because of your good lucky chance, you have never experienced the great fear of life and death in your life. So how can you threaten me? Li Qingshan was so despised, but there was no anger on his face. He said with a smile, as I said before, if I am not your opponent, it is also a matter of course. So I never expect to keep you here by myself. The great divine priest of light's deep eye sockets became darker and darker, gradually turning into a pair of pure black gems. He looked at the slightest change of the chi of heaven and earth in the street and sensed the more intense breathing around him. He said indifferently, I've said it before. Your luck is too good, your power is too great, but your experience is too little. When you first became the imperial preceptor, Liu Bai was determined to challenge you, but he was stopped by Yen Sei. You've never fought against a supreme expert in your life, so you can't understand. For people like you and me, the number of enemies doesn't mean much, unless the number is so large that it can make the ground of the mortal world sink. As soon as he finished speaking, the withered leaves above the street fluttered again, and dozens of crossbowmen appeared in the streets and alleys. The sharp crossbows in their hands reflected the biting coldness, and the tightened crossbows clearly emitted the hidden powerful force. The cultivation powerhouses of the Imperial Center Administration in brown official robes also gradually came over. In some rooms in the further marketplace, the array tactical master of the Tang Empire responsible for launching the encircling formation was constantly pouring psyche power into the formation eye. The hoofbeats sounded like thunder. The heavy-armored black cavalry of the Tang Empire began to gather here at high speed. The huge weight made the ground of the long street tremble violently, as if it would sink at any time. Li Qingshan withdrew his eyes from the mottled wall of the general's mansion and looked at the divine priest of light expressionlessly. He said, although you are the divine priest, your body is still that of a mortal. You are so fragile. Today, I will let you die in front of the general's mansion. It is also to find some overdue light for the innocent people who died in the general's mansion. The great divine priest of light said, I am the light. Li Qingshan said sarcastically, I didn't expect that after being imprisoned for 14 years, you have become so conceited. The great divine priest of light replied calmly, what you said makes sense. Conceit is against the law of the church. My expression is more accurate. I should say, since the headmaster of academy is not in Chang'an, then I am the light. Li Qingshan was silent. Stepping into the street with the momentum of a dragon and a tiger, he, the master of Tang Nation, exchanged words with the great divine priest of light. The content was shocking, but the tone was calm, as if they were having a tea contest. All the killing and stubbornness were hidden in the picking of the spoon. What they tested was the Taoist heart, and what they competed was still the Taoist heart. After this conversation, it seemed that there was no winner or loser, but it could also be said that the great divine priest of light had won, so there was no need to talk anymore. The strong sound of the spring sounded, and the sharp crossbow arrows shot out like a dense rainstorm. The sound of the arrows tearing the air was so sharp that it hurt people's ears. They surrounded the body of the great divine priest of light from all directions, leaving no gap. Almost at the same time, the array tactical master of Tang hidden in the distant marketplace started the encircling array. On the street outside the general's mansion, the chi of heaven and earth changed dramatically. Countless chi turbulence turned into a primordial chi lock, forcibly locking all the space around the great divine priest of light. With a clear dragon's roar, the sword on Li Qingshan's back thrummed and vibrated. The sheath flew out like a bolt of lightning, turning into an azure dragon in the air, and crossing half the street in a single moment. The dragon's roar rang out as it slammed into the divine body of Light's old face. This was a long-planned attack by the Tang Empire. Because the target was the horrible great divine priest of Light, they were well prepared. In addition to these powerful attacks in the street, there were many follow-up arrangements. And the opponent's response was very simple. Facing the rain of arrows, the encircling formation that locked the world, and the flying sword that had transformed into an azure dragon, the old man's deep and serene eyes emitted a straight ray of light, then a second ray, a third ray, 1,000 rays, 10,000 rays, countless rays. The great divine priest of light shone brightly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 2:11. The thick winter clouds over Chang'an City blocked the sun behind it. However, a sun suddenly appeared in the streets outside the general's mansion in the southern city. The blazing light burst into the eyes of the great divine priest of light and instantly illuminated the dark world. The withered leaves, mottled walls, broken stone lions, and old steps were all covered with a layer of dazzling halo. It completely lost its original appearance and became incomparably holy. Dozens of elite crossbowmen, known for their perseverance, threw away the crossbows in their hands and covered their eyes. They screamed and fell to the ground. The flying crossbow arrows screamed even more miserably. They had already lost their direction in the blazing light. Faintly, the quivering crossbow tails could be seen everywhere on the trees and walls. The black-armored soldiers of the Tang Empire gathered on the street were in chaos. The well-trained warhorses seemed to have sensed the supreme power contained in the blazing white curtain of light in the alley. They neighed and bent their front hooves respectfully, kneeling on the ground in fear. God knows how many cavalrymen were knocked off their feet. The South School of Haotian Taoism array tactical masters hiding in the distant marketplace were even paler. Several people's clothes were covered with blood. They did not suffer from any backfire of the chi of heaven and earth. But because of the great confusion and fear in their sense of perception, the spiritual impact directly hurt their internal organs. The exquisite encircling array tactical array inherited from the West Hill Divine Palace could not locate the target. They cultivated Haotian Taoism and poured the power of light into the encircling array tactical master. But the great divine priest of light was full of light from his body to his heart, without any impurities. It was impossible to lock a pool of clear water with crystal clear lake water. Further away on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, a breeze blew out of nowhere. The gravel on the Vermilion Bird engraved deeply in the stone slabs was blown everywhere by the wind. Tourists from various counties of the empire were blinded by the wind and blown by the gravel. They subconsciously lowered their heads to avoid it or rubbed their eyes with their hand. Even if they did not lower their heads or cover their eyes, they probably could not see that a very clear and faint shadow of the Vermilion Bird, almost invisible to the naked eye, rose from the stone carvings on the ground. It flapped its wings and rolled up the fallen leaves and gravel. In an instant it flew around Chang'an at an unimaginably terrifying speed. Unfortunately, the Vermilion Bird did not find any enemies in Chang'an. An angry roar came from the highest winter cloud. Li Qingshan stood at the front of the alleyway outside the general's estate silently. As he listened to the indignant cry from the cloud, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the empty alleyway. His expression became even more stern. The azure dragon that was wandering in the alley let out a low, unwilling roar. It slowly withdrew its aura and returned to its scabbard. The Vermilion Bird failed to find any trace of that person, nor did all the spies scattered in Chang'an. The countless backup plans that the Tang Empire had set up were forced to an abrupt halt. The thick winter clouds above Chang'an suddenly dispersed, revealing the long-awaited sun. The warm sunlight gently sprinkled down and shone on the thousands of mansions in the human world. It was everywhere. That person did not make a move, nor did he reveal the slightest hostility or battle intent. He only emitted his light will, and like the rays of the sun, it quietly faded away, leaving no trace. There is light everywhere in the world. How can you find light? Li Qingshan looked up at the light leaking through the winter clouds and murmured, above the god's throne, under the sky, "Senior brother, I finally understand what you mean by that." In the small courtyard behind the House of Red Sleeves, Master Yen Sei stared at the swaying candlestick on the table. His wrinkled eyes trembled slightly, as if he was thinking about a very important decision. Dewdrop reclined in his arms. Her slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and her face was full of confusion. However, she did not dare to ask when she saw the solemn expression of the old Taoist. Why did he light the candlestick in the daytime? Could it be that this divine talisman master, whom no one in the empire dared to offend, actually had some strange interests after he refused to really drink water these days? Looking at the candle tears gradually accumulating on the candlestick, Dewdrop's body was a little stiff. She thought that she had heard a lot of such interests, but she had never done it herself. She did not know whether the candle tears would hurt when falling on her body, or it was really interesting. She wanted to refuse, but she did not dare to say it out. Suddenly, the candlestick on the table suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the room. Dewdrop was startled and almost fell down from Yen Sei's legs. Master Yen Sei stared at the burning candlestick and narrowed his eyes for a long time. Then he rubbed Dewdrop's plump and tender buttocks lovingly, and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "In the future, I have something to do, so I probably will not come here often. If there is something that your Miss Jian can't solve in the future, you can go to the South Gate to find my junior brother." Now Dewdrop already knew the real identity of this old Taoist, and naturally knew that the junior brother he mentioned was Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang. Suddenly hearing these words, she understood that she had found another extremely thick mountain in the future. She could not help but feel a little surprised, but then she felt infinite fear. She thought that why did these words sound a bit like that he was making arrangements for his death? There was no true love on the pleasure ground, not to mention the age and status gap between Yen Sei and Dewdrop was too big. However, somehow, when Dewdrop looked at the wretched face of the old Taoist, she actually saw some sadness and reluctance. She subconsciously reached out to grasp the collar of the old Taoist's Taoist robe, completely forgetting that she usually hated the oil stains and dirt on this Taoist robe. An old man wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket full of dirt, with his hands clasped behind his stooped body, walked slowly in the streets of the eastern city. The cotton-padded jacket still gave off a very faint smell of hot and sour noodle slice soup. As previously said in the conversation with Li Qingshan outside the general's mansion, as long as the headmaster of academy was not in Chang'an, he was the light, and the only thing he was afraid of was the big tactical array of Chang'an. However, he was not evil. He had a kind heart, and his Taoist heart was pure and bright. Even if what he did was unpardonable in the eyes of the whole world, he still believed that he was the light. As long as the big tactical array of Chang'an was not fully activated, how could the vermilion bird divine talisman which arose from the light find him? However, people who had cultivated to this state, even if they could not understand the deepest law of the flow of the qi of heaven and earth in the world, they had begun to have some kind of connection between man and nature, and could vaguely know what would appear in front of the river of time. The old man felt that he would die in Chang'an, and this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He seemed to have seen the messengers of the underworld begin to dig a grave for him in Chang'an, but he did not know what would be written on the tombstone. The end of life was not necessarily a sad thing. However, just like Yen Sei had a nostalgia for the human world, he also had some regrets about it. Years ago, he had one foot over the threshold and saw the wonderful world over there, but was ruthlessly taken back by some existence. He was not reconciled to it, so he wanted to accept a successor before he left this world, and leave his mantle, so that his successor could clearly see the world in the future on his behalf. It was difficult for a divine talisman master to have a real successor, and it was also difficult for the great divine priest of light to have a real successor. Yensei now had Ninkei, so he had no regrets, but he did not. He even thought that he would not have one until the end of his life, until he came to Chang'an, came to Lin 47th Street and saw Sang. The old man stood outside the threshold of the old brush pen shop, looking at the little handmaiden who was busy in the shop. He was full of admiration, joy and satisfaction, and even moved to tears. He felt that although he had repeatedly disobeyed the will of Haotian in this life, at least in the last stage of his life, Haotian still mercifully gave him the most precious gift. There was no one in the world more suitable to be the successor of the great divine priest of light than this little girl, because there could not be a second person in this world who was cleaner than her, without a trace of impurity. The old man crossed the threshold and walked into the old brush pen shop. He bowed to the busy little girl and said, "Hello?" Sang turned around, put the big rag in her hand on the table, and answered, "Hello." These days, she had long noticed that this pitiful and lonely old man often appeared in the alley. Third Master Chi's subordinates had even asked her if she wanted to drive this old man away. However, she thought that he was just an ordinary strange old man, so she rejected the suggestion. She was even too lazy to pay more attention to him. The old man asked, "Do you know the biggest difference between human beings and beasts?" Sang did not think, directly shook her head and answered, "I don't know." Then she grabbed the rag and was ready to continue wiping the table. The old man sincerely said, "Can you try to think about it?" Sang thought for a while this time and said, "Human beings are more beasts than beasts, so we are stronger than beasts, so we can eat beasts." Hearing this answer, the old man was obviously not mentally prepared, and asked in surprise, "Why do you think so?" Sang shook her head and said, "I said I don't know. This is what young master told me when I was young." The old man sighed and said, "Your young master is also a wonderful person, either a great evil or a great good person." Sang thought for a while and said, "Young master is young master." She did not finish her words, and she did not have the habit of finishing her words. If the old man could understand, then so be it. If not, then it was none of her business. In fact, her meaning was very clear. A son was a son, a mother was a mother, a brother was a brother, a husband was a husband, and a young master was a young master. For her, Ninkei was a separate existence, different from the definition of evil, good, man, woman, rich, and poor. After a moment of silence, the old man said, "In my opinion, the biggest difference between human beings and beasts is inheritance. Beasts do not hesitate to pass on their own life and death, but human beings want to pass on their spirit. The similarity is that this kind of inheritance contains a very strong desire, and they both want to leave a trace of themselves in the world for a longer time." After a short pause, the old man looked at the little girl's slightly dark cheeks, and said solemnly, "If the inheritance represents the root of an aristocratic family or the orthodoxy, then this strong desire will even become some kind of heavy responsibility." Finally, the old man concluded, "This is the so-called future." Sang opened her bright willow-shaped eyes and looked at the strange old man in front of her. After thinking for a long time, she thought she understood, and asked seriously, "Do you want to find a wife and have children?" She looked up and down at the old man, judging his age, and said, "If you are sure that you can still have children, there are yen girls in the eastern city Rinyatsi. The price is not expensive, and they are easy to give birth to." The old man was in a trance and said, "I didn't mean that." Sang was stunned for a while, and then she shook her head shyly and said, I can't give birth to children for others. I am sure that this is the first time that I have fallen in love with the character I wrote, and it is only second to my love for my mother and my leader. I wish my leader a happy birthday. Besides, tomorrow is Saturday, and I have to rest. I am really lazy, cheap, and shameless. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 212. After a while, Sang Sang looked at the old man and said seriously, "If you only like domestic women and not yen women, I know some girls from brothels. But it will cost a lot if you want them to bear children for you." The old man was in a trance again. After a long silence, he finally woke up and said seriously, "I don't want to find a wife to bear children. I want to find a disciple to inherit my mantle." It was Sang Sang's turn to be in a trance. She thought, what does finding a disciple have to do with me? My bones are not unique, and my background is not strange. Although your cotton-padded jacket is indeed dirty, it seems that you have not begged these days. No matter how I look at it, you don't look like an otherworldly sublime being in the stories I heard from Ning Kei when I was young. Do you want me to be your disciple, or do you want me to find you a disciple? She asked seriously. The old man answered seriously, "I want you to be my disciple." Sang Sang decided to ignore him. She squatted down and began to wipe the table legs. The old man looked at the bright table leg, which was absolutely free of any stains, and remained silent. The old man didn't leave the old brush pen shop. He followed Sang Sang and watched her. He watched as Sang Sang wiped the tables and chairs, cleaned the non-existent dust, and repaired the door that had been repaired long ago. He watched as Sang Sang closed the door, fetched water from the well, washed the rice, prepared the vegetables, cooked the rice and chopped the garlic. He watched as Sang Sang sat at the table and began to eat alone. Sang Sang didn't invite him to eat with her. Strangely, she didn't ask him to leave either. The old man looked at her through the window and said sympathetically, "Are you bored?" Sang Sang's hand holding the bowl slightly stiffened. She looked at the 3 vegetables on the white rice and nodded. Then she continued to chew the vegetables in her mouth, and her dark cheeks bulged slightly. After dinner, Sang Sang washed the dishes, face and feet and prepared to sleep. Before going to bed, she took out a quilt and handed it to the old man who had been guarding in the courtyard. She said, "If there is no place to sleep, you can put the table together in front and sleep for the night." The old man felt the weight of the quilt and became more determined. He looked at the little girl and asked seriously, "Do you believe in lucky chance?" Sang Sang shook her head. Then she thought of their encounter many years ago and the life they had together. Her willowy eyes brightened and she nodded again. "I believe in fate." The old man said, "I believe that everyone is destined to meet some people and do some things. These things arranged by Haotian are fated chances." The old man's cloudy eyes gradually brightened. He looked at the night view of Chang, and outside the small courtyard, and said after a moment of silence, "Many years ago, I saw the shadow of nightfall in this city. Once I saw it, it was like meeting. Since we've met, we can't be separated anymore. It's just that what I've seen isn't real, and what I've met isn't concrete. I only know that he exists, but I don't know where he is." Then, I saw a man in Chang, and who was born with knowledge. I felt that this was wrong, because there should not be anyone in the world who was born with knowledge. So, my lucky chance with him began. My destiny with him is to see him and then kill him. After seeing him for 9 months, I tried to kill him, but I knew that I didn't kill him because he was still alive. I was the only person in the world who could clearly feel that he was still alive. It's just that since then, the opportunity has faded. Apart from the occasional time, I've never been able to see where he is. Until recently, I saw him again, so I came to find him and renew my lucky chant. The old man muttered the past like a devout, foolish woman sitting on the high threshold. Sang Sang listened in silence for a long time. Her willowy eyes occasionally brightened and then disappeared. Then, she asked, "Find him. What will you do?" The old man said, "Kill him." Sang Sang asked, "If you're such a great person, why didn't you kill him back then?" "Because the lucky chance between us is not absolute. Not everyone can easily enter this city to kill people, especially me. So, only the people in this city could do it back then. More importantly, the whole world was skeptical of what I saw. They didn't believe me at all. The old man continued, I don't know what will happen after I find him. Ordinary people like us can never predict Haotian's arrangements. But I always believe that he is a person who has a great lucky chance with me. I thought that I came to Chang and to understand this lucky chance until I met you. The old man looked at Song Song's slightly dark cheeks and bright willowy eyes. He was silent for a long time. He silently thought about the true reason why so many loyal subordinates sacrificed themselves, which made the whole Peach Mountain and the Tang Empire feel uneasy and attracted him to Chang'an. Was it the dark shadow or the person in front of him? Song Song's eyelashes drooped slightly and asked calmly, What can I learn from you? The old man looked at her slightly fluttering eyelashes and ordinary face. He said, Divine skill. Sang Sing asked, Is divine skill very powerful? The old man nodded and said, Very powerful. Sang Sang lowered her head even more, which made her eyelashes look longer. She whispered, My young master is very powerful. After I learn divine skill, can I help him beat people? The old man smiled and said, Of course you can. Sang Sang raised her head and looked at the old man attentively with her slightly dark face. She asked bravely, Can I defeat you? The old man looked at the little girl's little face. He looked at the pair of eyes that were like clear spring water between the slightly black mountain rocks. It was as if he wanted to see into the deepest part of the clear spring water. He still did not see a trace of impurity, just transparent, absolutely transparent. He could not help but let out a sigh from the depths of his heart. He said in a solemn tone as if he was prophesying, Definitely. Sang Sang asked, What is divine skill? The old man replied, Cultivation is about perceiving and then controlling the aura between heaven and earth. Divine skill is about perceiving and controlling the divine light of Haotian. The so-called divine light, you have seen it since you were born. You have seen it when you wake up in the morning. You have seen it when you close your door at dusk. You have seen it in summer. You have seen it in winter. You have seen it all the time. Sang Sang slightly frowned and asked, What is that? The night in Chang'an was quiet. The sky was filled with stars, but it was not as bright as the day. The old man stood in the cramped courtyard and slowly spread his arms, as if he wanted to bear all the light in the world. Haotian's divine light is the sunlight. As soon as he finished speaking, the tip of the middle finger of the old man's right hand that was sticking out of the sleeve of his dirty cotton jacket suddenly became bright. It was unknown where the luster came from, but it was slowly released from the inside out. It was like a flower of light, covering all the lines on his fingertips. It was holy and milky white, causing people to feel respect in their hearts. The old man looked at the little girl in front of him and said calmly, To perceive Haotian's divine light, even if it takes 10 years, it will not be too long. Therefore, what you need at the beginning is great forbearance and patience. Hearing this, Sang Sang seemed to be thinking. She raised her right index finger and put her slender finger into the dark winter night. The slightly dark finger gently swayed in the wind, and then produced a dim light, like a candle in the wind, which could be extinguished at any time. However, it was still lit and did not go out. The old man looked at the light at the tip of her slender index finger, as if he was drunk and did not want to wake up. In the winter of the 14th year of the Tianqi era, the great divine priest of light who escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace came to Chang'an because of a feeling. He did not find the shadow of the dark night, but he found his successor. This was probably some kind of Tianqi. Somewhere on the grassland, not far from the city of Wei in the northwest border of the Tang Empire. Under a dying winter tree, a scholar in a cotton-padded jacket was cooking. He calmly and attentively looked at the scroll in his left hand. Suddenly, he thought of something and took a ladle of water from his waist. He poured it into the milky white soup pot and slightly suppressed the boiling in the pot. Taking advantage of the time he had won, he began to slowly cut the meat. The perfectly frozen mutton danced under the sharp knife like snowflakes. However, his movements were too slow. Before he could finish cutting the meat, the soup pot boiled again. Another ladle of water was poured into the soup pot, and the scholar continued to cut the meat. The tall headmaster of the academy held a bowl and chopsticks that had already been mixed. He waited by the soup pot and sighed anxiously from time to time. When it comes to fate and lucky chance, no one knows what they will see or encounter. No one knows what it means to them. Ideas and reality are often two opposite worlds. For example, the general and the woman we saw in the city of Wei a few days ago. Maybe they will live forever, or maybe they will return to the Central Plains next year. But no matter what happens, they may not be as happy as they seem. The headmaster of the academy tapped the empty bowl with his chopsticks and shook his head. He sighed and said, "Not happy doesn't mean it will be gloomy. I don't think it's a kind of sadness. Instead, I think it's full of comedy. For example, the soup and mutton are here, but I haven't eaten it for an hour. It doesn't mean I will always be sad. Maybe the first bite of mutton will be the best thing I have ever eaten in my life." Any student must learn to hear the teacher's true intentions from his dignified words. As the eldest brother of the academy, of course, the scholar could best understand the headmaster's likes and dislikes. Therefore, he put the scroll back to his waist and began to cut the meat faster, in case the teacher would really get mad later. However, as Chen Pippi had once told Ning Kai, eldest brother was very serious in his work. That was why he did things very slowly. Even though the headmaster of the academy was waiting beside the soup pot with bowls and chopsticks like a beggar, which gave him unprecedented pressure, his speed of cutting meat did not improve much. In order to distract the teacher and relieve the current mental pressure, the eldest brother asked while cutting the meat, "Teacher, can't you see the future?" Hearing this question, the headmaster of the academy was furious. He pointed to the gray winter sky and shouted, "I can't even see the sky, how can I see the future?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 213. The headmaster put down his fingers and looked at the boiling soup pot and the slices of meat on the chopping board that looked like snow. He said bitterly, "If I knew everything, why would I live like a stray dog?" Eldest brother cut the delicious mutton and thought to himself with a smile, "Teacher, when have you ever been afraid?" The headmaster put the bowl and chopsticks on the chopping board and rolled up his sleeve. He easily grabbed the sharp kitchen knife from eldest brother's hand. With a few swishing sounds, the mutton slices flew and piled up into a snowy mountain. The mutton was cooked in the boiling soup. The headmaster happily grabbed the food with his chopsticks and ate to his heart's content. The soup dripped down his beard. He did not even think of letting his most beloved disciple, the old yellow bull, who was eating grass on the meadow, roll its eyes at him and mooed discontentedly. Eldest brother smiled and shook his head at his teacher's happy expression. He wiped his hands clean and walked slowly to the withered winter tree. Looking at the blue lake not far below the meadow and the looming horse gang on the other side of the lake, he slowly raised his eyebrows and asked thoughtfully, "Teacher, is this the Shubi Lake of youngest brother?" As time passed, some things that he didn't know would be known by some means. For example, the one who entered the back mountain of the academy was not Prince Long Qing, but a little guy named Ning Quebec. The headmaster filled a bowl of mutton soup and drank it slowly. His slender eyebrows and tail seemed to be dancing in the winter wind. He looked at the nearby lake and somewhere further away and said, "He grew up in the city of Wei and became an adult in Shubi Lake." Eldest brother nodded and looked back at the headmaster. He asked, "Teacher, why are we coming to the city of Wei?" The headmaster held the soup bowl and looked at the horse gang who were busy making a living by the Shubi Lake. He said, "After all, he is my student. Although we haven't met, it's on the way. Let's consider it a home visit." Eldest brother thought of the scene before he left the academy in Chang'an last spring. He thought of the headmaster's words and the big black umbrella on the lad's back. He asked, "Teacher, did you know that youngest brother would become youngest brother?" The headmaster put down the soup bowl and sighed with satisfaction while touching his slightly bulging belly. He shook his head and said, "There is no such thing as fate in the world. In this case, how can I predict it? Haotian can't arrange everything." The headmaster looked up at the clear sky of the grassland and seemed to see the trembling little boy holding a chopper in the woodshed more than a decade ago. He said with emotion, "Many years ago, I saw your youngest brother. At that time, I just felt that he looked like an old friend. I didn't expect that he would survive and come to me." Eldest brother looked at the grassland and said with some concern, "I don't know if youngest brother can handle going into the wilderness alone." The headmaster said, "That is a difficult child. The wilderness is his home, so he won't be too embarrassed. If he is really embarrassed, aren't you his senior brother?" Eldest senior brother smiled and lowered his head, as gentle as the spring breeze. The shrill sound of arrows piercing through the air was like the shrill sound of a flute, instantly tearing apart the twilight above the camp. Because the distance was too far, when the arrow flew out of the camp, it was already crooked and slowed down. Like a drunken man, it fell to the ground in a sorry state. It didn't cause any damage, but everyone in the camp knew that the other party's whistling arrow was meant to warn or show off, so they didn't feel relaxed. The smoke and dust in the distance of the grassland gradually dispersed, revealing more than 100 horsemen. Vaguely, the barbarians wrapped in animal hide and cotton armor on the horses' backs were mighty and majestic. They held the reins with one hand and screamed crazily, as if they had seen a large number of prey. The Yen Kingdom's cavalry in the camp split up to meet them. When they were a few arrows away, the grassland barbarians whistled and dispersed. They circled around the flat plains and shallow waters around the camp. They refused to approach, but also had no intention of leaving. Ning Ke was the first to find the traces of the horse gang. After giving a warning, he jumped off the carriage and silently led the big black horse, ready to mount the saddle at any time. However, looking at the grassland barbarians whistling and wandering around, he gradually frowned. In the winter grassland, it was already a large group of horse gang that could gather more than 100 elite horsemen. He didn't know when they started to target the grain delivery team, so he subconsciously looked to his side. The young boys and girls of Black Ink Garden had lived in the Great River Kingdom in the far south for a long time. They had only heard about the ferocity and terror of the Northern Horse Gang in legends. This was the first time in their lives that they had to face these grassland horse gang. However, all the disciples of Black Ink Garden, including Catgirl, were silent and occasionally nervous, but absolutely not flustered. Each of them held a long handle of a thin knife in their hands and vigilantly waited for the battle to come. At this moment, 3 horsemen galloped out from the north of the camp. They scattered at high speed under the last red flame twilight. Nominally, the disciples of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom were responsible for the grain delivery to the left king's palace in the grassland. However, the Yen Kingdom's cavalry, who were responsible for the safety of the grain team, didn't really obey the order. They were aloof from each other and disliked each other. However, looking at the 3 horsemen galloping out, Zhuo Zhihua couldn't help but praise them. The Yen Kingdom's general's reaction speed is not slow to decide to send a messenger to the palace in the first place. Hearing this, Ning Ke shook his head and led the big black horse to her side. He said, "These barbarians who look like horse gang might be the cavalry of the left king's palace." Zhuo Zhihua and the girls beside the carriage were shocked when they heard this. Ning Ke didn't explain. He looked at the grassland horse gang wandering in the wilderness and the Yen Kingdom's cavalrymen galloping out like 3 arrows. He said, "If we were at the frontier fortress of the Yen territory in the south, there might be a chance to send a messenger. But now that we are deep in the grassland, it is impossible for these 3 cavalrymen to escape." After defeating the Ueluan Kingdom monk by the Jade Waste Lake and living together for the past few days, The girls of Great River Kingdom trusted Ning Ke more and more. They subconsciously believed in his judgment. Cat Girl jumped on the carriage in shock and looked at the 3 Yen cavalrymen who were getting farther and farther away. Her face was full of worry. The Yen Kingdom's general's reaction speed was not slow. But it was precisely because of this that Ning Ke could no longer change the fate of the 3 Yen cavalrymen. Moreover, he was just an ordinary disciple of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom. The sun was sinking lower and lower. The light on the grassland was getting dimmer and the twilight was getting thicker. The 3 Yen cavalrymen were like tiny silhouettes in front of a blood-red canvas. The 3 cavalrymen were either shot by arrows or stopped by the horse rope. They fell to the ground and there was no more movement. After a while, dozens of grassland horse gang came from the same direction. The corpses of the 3 Yen cavalrymen were dragged by ropes behind the horses. From time to time, the corpses would bump into the soil on the ground. The scene was bloody and the scene was horrible. The 2 groups of grassland horse gang gathered together and let out a burst of arrogant laughter. The so-called clamor was nothing more than this. Ning Ke had seen such scenes on the grassland many times. Back then, he had also dragged the corpse of the leader of the horse gang by the Shubi Lake for a week as a demonstration. Therefore, he was not moved. But for the young girls and the civilians in the grain transport team, such a tragic scene would definitely make them have nightmares every night. They could faintly hear the sound of breathing around them becoming rapid and panicky. As for the 200 Yen cavalrymen, they were in an uproar when they saw their comrades being killed and humiliated. They only managed to calm down under the strong suppression of their commanding officer. No one was a match for these barbarians on the grassland, at least before the desolate man moved south. The previous scene was proof. Therefore, even though the Yen army had the advantage in numbers and had the disciples of Black Ink Garden as the main fighting force, they could only suppress their anger and fear. They used the grain transport team to set up a simple formation and used the fastest speed to set up a defensive attack, waiting for the grassland horse gang to attack. The atmosphere in the camp became unusually tense. It was the same after the dozens of Yen cavalrymen returned to the camp. This was because even if they had not seen it with their own eyes, they had heard of the savagery of the grassland horse gang. Especially the civilians in the grain transport team, their faces were ashen and their bodies were trembling. They could not even complete the simplest transportation work. Unexpectedly, the grassland horse gang did not take advantage of the last light and the good opportunity to attack when the people in the camp were distracted. Instead, they held the reins and stopped a few arrows away, watching the people in the camp coldly. Among them, the 3 leaders of the horse gang were waving their horse whips and pointing, looking extremely arrogant. As night fell, a bonfire was lit in the camp. The generals of the Yen army personally set up surveillance posts. The soldiers looked nervously at the pitch-black periphery of the grassland, facing the imminent danger. Almost no one could sleep peacefully, thinking that once they fell asleep, they would not wake up again. They were worried that the horse gang would attack at night. Ning Ke knew the behavior of the horse gang very well. Whether it was the real horse gang or the palace cavalry disguised as horse gang, once they got on a horse and became a thief, they would firmly follow the behavior of the horse gang. The horse gang would not choose to attack at night. He set up his small tent beside the horse carriage and prepared to have a good sleep in preparation for the bloody battle the next morning. A gust of night wind blew, lifting the tent and the curtain of the horse carriage. His pupils shrank because he found that there was no one in the horse carriage. He did not know where the girl in white, Mo Shanshan, had gone. He quietly climbed to the top of the horse carriage and looked at the periphery of the camp with the help of the extremely dim starlight. There was a circle of burning bonfire, and on the other side of the flame, he could vaguely see a thin figure. On this piece of the winter plains, except for him, who had extremely sharp eyes, probably no one could see the thin figure. Under the illumination of the fire and starlight, the thin figure's white robe seemed even thinner, as if it would float away with a blow of the night wind. It was like a ghost or a spirit, and no one knew what it was doing. Ning Ke looked at it silently, deep in thought. Then he jumped off the horse carriage, and fell asleep with his clothes on. When the night was at its darkest, several shrill screams suddenly sounded from the southwest of the camp, as well as the wild howls of the horses. The Yen cavalry, who had been vigilant in the north, was startled and looked in that direction. Ning Ke, who was in the tent beside the horse carriage, had woken up. He put his ear to the ground and listened for a while. Through the gap of the curtain, he saw the girl's figure cut out by the candlelight in the horse carriage. It gradually became brighter. He smiled and then closed his eyes, continuing to sleep peacefully. In his dream, he wondered when he could write such a powerful fire talisman. Happy Face, I wish everyone a happy Lantern Festival and a prosperous life. Just like this talisman, it smells so good. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 214. No one dared to investigate at night. There were also people like Ning Ke who knew what had happened and didn't want to investigate. The next morning, people in the camp found that the horse gang, which had been closely following not far from the north, had disappeared without a trace. However, before they could rejoice, they heard horse hooves and sharp whistles again. The horse gang came again in the morning, but they kept a distance vigilantly, not as arrogant as yesterday. Zhuo Zhihua summoned the Yen army general and severely reprimanded him. After all, these girls from the Great River Kingdom were cultivators of the Black Ink Garden, so they had a different identity. The Yen army general could only listen to the reprimand. Then he organized the team and left the camp. Ignoring the horse gang who were patrolling outside, they crossed a gentle slope to the south and continued to march towards the northeast palace. It was not until they left the camp that they saw a few charred horse corpses in the southwest direction. They thought it was probably the result of the chaos last night. The charred horse corpses had been eaten by the wild wolves in the wilderness. Their limbs were broken and looked terrible. There were white burn marks on the gravel, as if it had been burned for a whole night. Both the Yen cavalry and the ordinary coachmen were frightened and no one dared to speak. In the following days, the horse gang continued to follow the grain team, but they seemed to be more cautious. They harassed but did not attack, nor did they attack. For some reason, they were divided into several small teams. The horse gang closest to the grain team only had about 10 riders, but each of them had 2 horses. Obviously, they were greedy for speed. They had been in the wilderness for a long time and were not far from the left tent palace. If the elite cavalry ran at full speed, it would only take about 4 or 5 days to arrive. But now they were moving slowly with the grain wagons and people. Based on the current speed, it would take at least half a month to meet with the cavalry of the palace. And after Ning Ke's words, people felt that the origin of the horse gang was a little strange. They could not help but feel confused. They thought that even if they met with the cavalry of the palace, they might not be really safe. The number of horse gang wandering around was sometimes large and sometimes small. But there was always a certain number of them in sight to maintain the pressure on the grain team. Several days passed. Although the two sides did not really fight, the fear of being attacked at any time and the silent and oppressive atmosphere caused the morale of the grain team to gradually slacken, especially the pale-faced civilian workers. It seemed that if there was a thunder in the sky, they would probably be scared to death. Zhuo Zhihua came to the side of the carriage and looked anxiously at the figures of the horse gang in the distant sky. She said, "We must make these horse gang afraid. If we let them follow us like this, we may be defeated on our own before they attack us. Moreover, there are other benefits in staying further away." It was not convenient to explain the advantages of being further away. The disciples of Black Ink Garden around the horse carriage were well aware of it. If there was a danger of the camp collapsing, the horse gang would be further away. As for what would happen to the Yen army and civilians, no one could care too much about it in this dangerous wilderness. Ning Ke did not participate in the discussion. The Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom had been on good terms for generations. His relationship with these girls was also very good. But after all, he was taking advantage of the situation to enter the wilderness. At this dangerous moment, it was not convenient for him to express too many opinions. In addition, the more important reason was that his attention was always on the horse carriage. It fell on the girl in white with straight eyebrows, Mo Shanshan. After seeing the fire talisman that night, he vaguely guessed the identity of the girl in white in the horse carriage. Thinking of returning from the wilderness last spring with the disguised Tang princess, he could not help but feel a little emotional about the fate arranged by Haotian and his own luck. If he could be with such a person, no matter how dangerous it would be a little less. There were more Yen cavalry escorting the grain team than the horse gang. Together with the girl disciples from Black Ink Garden, it was difficult to distinguish the strength of the two sides. Perhaps it was for this reason that the horse gang always followed the grain team closely and did not choose to attack. Since the tragedy of the wildfire that day, there was not even a night attack. The horse gang did not launch a night attack, but the grain team could not relax their patrols at night. They were even more nervous every night. Perhaps no one could see it, but every time Ning Ke woke up in the middle of the night, he would see Mo Shanshan in white appear outside the camp at night. He knew that she was setting up a talisman array. This went on for several days. No matter how strong the girl Mo Shanshan was, her psyche power was rapidly consumed, and she could not support it for a long time. Seeing the slightly round cheeks behind the curtain gradually thin and pale, Ning Ke finally decided to take action. He learned talisman Taoism from Master Yensei, and understood that before entering the knowing destiny divine talisman master state, the characteristics of talisman Taoism determined that a talisman master could only focus on defense and cooperation, and it was difficult to take the initiative to attack. Although Mo Shanshan's state was unfathomable, she obviously lacked a lot of experience in the application of talisman Taoism in the battle. It was late at night and there was no half-moon in the sky, only a few stars. The camp was brightly lit, but the surrounding wilderness was dark, and no one knew how many hidden dangers there were. The carriage slightly shook, and Mo Shanshan quietly got off. She was ready to go outside the camp to draw talisman arrays. Suddenly, her eyes slightly brightened, and she turned around and coldly looked at the inconspicuous small tent behind the carriage. Ning Ke opened the tent curtain and walked out. He looked at her and said, "If you are alone, the horse gang outside will not be able to stop you. But you are not alone. You have to take care of so many companions and grain wagons, and I don't know how many days you have to take care of them. You can't hold on like this." Mo Shanshan looked at him, as if she was looking at the dark night behind him. Her eyes were cold and indifferent. Then she slightly lowered her eyes, and her long and slightly sparse eyelashes gently blinked, but she did not say a word. Ning Ke looked at her expression and continued, "If you are a divine talisman master, you can burn all the horse gang with a talisman. The problem is that you are not a divine talisman master, so you have to change your method." Mo Shanshan raised her head, looked at him and indifferently asked, "What method?" Ning Ke said, "Whether the horse gang outside is real or fake, or whether they are raised by the Left Tent Palace or the Yen people, we have to use the horse gang's method to deal with them." The extremely faint starlight fell on Mo Shanshan's beautiful but somewhat dull face, reflecting her black eyebrows more clearly. She looked at Ning Ke and asked after a moment of silence, "What method?" "There can only be one reason for the horse gang to take action, and that is profit. As long as they are sure that the price they pay will exceed the profit, they will naturally retreat." Ning Ke said, "Obviously, the horse gang's intelligence missed you. They don't know your existence, so they are forced to change their plan. Then we have already taken the lead." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and suddenly asked, "Do you know who I am?" Ning Ke did not answer this question. Mo Shanshan repeated the previous question, What method can we use to drive away the horse gang? Ning Ke replied, the so-called horse gang is a thief when mounted, and a citizen when dismounted. They don't believe in moral judgment, nor do they care about the general trend of the world. They only care about whose knife is sharper. If we want to frighten or scare them away, as I said, we have to use the horse gang's method. Emo Shanshan continued to repeat, what method? Ning Ke looked at the girl's beautiful but indifferent cheeks and suddenly laughed, saying, as I said, the horse gang's method. He was very persistent and bored, but Emo Shanshan was even more persistent and bored than him, and continued to repeat, what method? Ning Ke shook his head and replied with a smile, we will become thieves on the horse and kill them. Emo Shanshan replied concisely, I won't kill anyone. Ning Ke said concisely, I can teach you. Emo Shanshan replied concisely, okay. After a moment, Ning Ke led the big black horse, and Emo Shanshan led a white horse. They slowly walked towards the dark wilderness outside the camp. The night wind blew the girl's fine hair on her temples, and she suddenly asked, where did these horse gang come from? Ning Ke could not make an accurate judgment about the horse gang that surrounded them and seemed to be ready to attack at any time. He was familiar with the wilderness in the west and the horse gang in the wilderness. Even if he started from the cause of the incident, he still lacked enough information and the ability to analyze the political situation. The grain team, supervised by the girls of the Great River Kingdom, carried the goodwill of the countries in the Central Plains, and the intention of the Divine Hall to negotiate for peace. Now that the situation in the wilderness was tense, the authentic horse gang with a keen sense of smell had long disappeared. The horse gang that appeared now obviously wanted to kill and rob the grain. Their purpose had nothing to do with the grain, but to sabotage the peace talks. There were not many forces that had a reason to do so. The desolate man's tribe that moved south from the cold region of the far north should not be able to raise such a large group of horse gang in such a short period of time. The Ueluan kingdom wanted to frame the people of the Great River Kingdom, but no one would be so bored and sinister just for a warm stream. The Yen kingdom had been suffering from the left tent palace for a long time, and they did not want to miss the opportunity to pacify the north. However, would the Emperor of Yen secretly take the risk of offending the Divine Hall? After thinking about it, Ning Ke could only think of the simplest possibilities. Once all of them were eliminated, he could not think of anyone else who had the ability to raise such a large group of horse gang on the grassland. However, it was not a big problem for him that he could not figure it out. Ning Ke's attitude towards the horse gang, who he had been dealing with for many years, had always been very clear. Only dead horse gangs were good horse gangs. Then, he would kill the dozen or so horse gang closest to him first. There were clouds floating above the night sky, covering the last few remaining stars. Far away from the lights of the camp, the surrounding wilderness was dark, and only the faint sound of horse hooves could be heard. Coming to the meadow about an arrow's length away from the dozen or so horse gang stalking them, Ning Ke gently lifted the reins. The big black horse shook its head impatiently, but it still stopped as instructed. The horse gang was naturally vigilant. Even the faintest sound of horse hooves would wake them up from their sleep. Ning Ke slightly exerted strength in his waist and abdomen, his feet stepped on the stirrups to stand up, and he took out the boxwood bow from behind. Emo Shanshan glanced at him and thought, what's the use of arrows at such a distance? The horse gang in the distance had already woken up and were ready to fight. In the dark night, Ning Ke could not see his 5 fingers holding the bow, so he quietly looked in that direction, and then slowly closed his eyes. He put an arrow on the bow, aimed at an unknown place, and then released the bowstring. The bowstring vibrated and hummed in the night sky. A horse gang in the distance was shot in the chest by an arrow. Blood spurted out and he fell to the ground with a muffled groan. I had a bad cold for a whole day and I almost fainted. Damn it, fortunately I wrote it out, damn it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:15. Ning-Kei is Mr. 13 of the second floor. The meaning is clear. He is an idiot. I'm also an idiot. That's why I decided to write 10,000 words 7 days a week starting from February 13th. I'll get it done. But the beginning will definitely be the hardest, so don't worry about me if your writing is rough. Next week, I'll start revising the second volume. Continue writing, see you later. No matter if it was a thief or a soldier, the person sitting on the saddle usually used a short bow or a machete because of the limited space. But Ning-Kei was different. Since he started fighting in the city of Wei, the boxwood bow and padao he used were longer. So he was used to stepping on the saddle, straightening his body to draw the bow and shoot arrows or draw his machete to cut people. Although it was a little inconvenient to operate, in the eyes of the onlookers, this posture was actually quite magnificent. When he shot another arrow and killed the second horse gang in the distance in the darkness of the night, the girl Mo Shanshan, who had been following him expressionlessly, finally had some splendor in her eyes. The wilderness was full of winter clouds that covered the stars. In the dark night, even the hand holding the bow could not be seen clearly. But Ning-Kei could accurately shoot the horse gang a stone's throw away. It was really incredible. It was as if the night could not cover his eyes at all, as if he could clearly see everything in the darkness. Although Ning-Kei only had 10 of his acupoints opened and the chi of heaven and earth that he could control was too little, his meditation and mental training over the years had made his psyche power perception as sharp as a needle. Thus, he was extremely sensitive to the aura changes of things around him. When he climbed the mountain on the second floor of the academy, he relied on this to walk through the mountain path. At this time, in the dark night, he could easily see the horse gang and lock them in front of his arrow. It was also because of his extremely condensed and sensitive psyche power. The psyche power came out of the sense of perception and touched the chi between heaven and earth with the night wind. So to him, the wilderness was like daytime. This method should not have been used by cultivators in the past because it wasted precious psyche power. If there was enough psyche power, he could directly kill those ordinary horse gang. Why use psyche power as a means of detection? All in all, it could only be said that Ning-Kei was different from ordinary cultivators. The amount of chi of heaven and earth he could control was so little that it made people sigh. His psyche power was so abundant and sensitive that it made people sigh. His willpower to combine cultivation and fighting was so great that it made people sigh. A few sigh had created such a scene. When Ning-Kei shot the second arrow, Mo Shanshan quietly stared at him. As the most outstanding cultivator of the young generation in the world, she acutely noticed that there was a trace of condensed psyche power oscillating beside her at this moment. She could not help but frown slightly and thought to herself, "Is he really a cultivator?" The horse gang in the distance had just woken up from their sleep when 2 of their companions were killed by the arrow. Although they were shocked at how the arrow could be so accurate in the dark night, they still reacted very quickly. They jumped on the back of the horse, fiercely squeezed the horse's abdomen, and ran wildly toward the direction of the arrow. They wanted to shorten the distance between the 2 sides in the shortest time, so that the enemy could not display his terrifying archery. At the same time, they also wanted the darkness to no longer be a curtain in front of them so that they could fight back. The hooves sounded like rain. In the process of the horse gang rushing over, Ning-Kei pulled the bowstring and an arrow shot into the head of a horse. The horse screamed and fell to the ground, throwing the horse gang on its back to the ground. Another arrow narrowly brushed past the cheek of a horse gang and flew away. The horse gang on the grassland were good at riding and shooting. While charging, they retracted their bodies into the horse's abdomen, so Ning-Kei's arrows could not directly threaten them. In a flash, accompanied by the increasingly clear and dense hooves, the nearly 10 horse gang swept over like a gust of wind. One could even see the reflection of the sharp weapons. The big black horse had not experienced a real battle in the wild, but it was not afraid when it saw its own kind rushing closer and closer. Instead, its eyes revealed the light of excitement. It kept stamping its front hooves excitedly and wanted to rush forward without waiting for Ning Ke to pull the reins. Looking at the approaching horse gang and listening to their shrill and furious roars, Mo Shanshan did not know how Ning Ke was going to deal with them. Her fingers that were hidden in her white sleeves gently picked up something. The excitement of the big black horse did not comfort Ning Quebec. He angrily slapped its head heavily and signaled it to be quiet. Then he jumped off the horse's back. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, he did not hesitate and rushed towards the horse gang that was sweeping up the dust and gravel. The distance between the two sides was already very close. It was only a matter of a moment before they came into contact. No one had the time to pull the bow and shoot an arrow. The horse gang finally saw the appearance of the enemy clearly. The two horses on the left and right at the front lifted the reins and directly collided with Ning Quebec. The few horses following behind sat up straight with strange cries, pulled out the machetes from their waists and waved them continuously. There was a clang. Ning Ke pulled out the padao on his back and crossed his feet to avoid the two horses that came with a strong gust of wind. He turned his right hand and the blade drew out two snow-white rays of light. Then, blood suddenly appeared. The two horses cried out in pain and suddenly fell forward, landing heavily on the plains with two muffled sounds. Their front hooves, which had been chopped off by the padao, were still flying in the air due to inertia, drawing out two miserable streaks of blood. The blade attacked, following a curved and deadly cold path. If it was an ordinary person, perhaps he would not be able to avoid such a strange chopping. But Ning Ke was too familiar with the horse gang and the machetes that they used. He was so familiar that even if he closed his eyes, he could easily avoid being touched by them. At this time, the night was deep. There was not much difference between opening or closing one's eyes. Therefore, he easily lowered his head, turned and swept sideways, avoiding the several machetes from the horse gang. Then, he clenched his hands and the slender padao tore a few terrifying cracks in the night sky. It cut off several horse hooves, split open the chest and abdomen of the horse gang, and brought down a few strands of fine horse mane. Then, it was heavily inserted into the slightly hard mud of the field. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to the front of the horse gang. Under his padao, 2 horse gang members died and 5 horses fell. But the machetes in the hands of the horse gang did not leave any mark on him. At this time, the winter clouds in the sky occasionally scattered, revealing some starlight. Although they still could not see his face clearly, they could clearly see his figure. The horse gang lifted the reins and turned back to look at Ning Ke, who was standing in the field with a knife. Their bodies were stiff and their hands holding the machetes kept trembling. But they still felt extremely cold. The horse gang used the fastest speed to rescue their companions who were still breathing on the ground. They rode together to the periphery for a distance and looked at Ning Ke nervously and vigilantly, but they did not have the courage to draw their bows and aim at him. Ning Ke walked over and listened to the miserable howls of the horses with broken hooves in the night. He held the padao in his hand and cut the throats of the horses slowly and steadily, letting them die at the fastest speed. Then, he looked at the horse gang not far away and stretched out his fingers to shake in the night wind. He did not know if the other party could see his movements clearly and if they could understand the meaning of his movement. "Why don't you kill all these horse gang?" Mo Shanshan looked at the horse gang who were fleeing in the night and asked in confusion. "The horse gang can't be killed," Ning Ke said. "At least I can't kill this group of horse gang who are following us alone." Mo Shanshan turned back to look at him. She looked very focused, but her eyes were still drifting, showing that she was not focused. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful round face and said after a moment of silence, "The reason why I killed people tonight is that I hope they can bring back an accurate message." "What message?" "I want to tell them that in addition to you, the Talisman Master, there is another person who is good at killing horse gang in the grain delivery team." If this group of horse gang wants to eat us, they have to pay a greater price. If the harvest is not proportional to the risk, maybe they will withdraw by themselves. Emo Shanshan said, although I have never met horse gang, I have heard many legends about grassland horse gang. They are known for being cold and bloodthirsty. How could they retreat because of some small setbacks? The colder and more murderous a person is, the more he is afraid of death. I may know more about horse gang than you do. He continued to say, tonight I came to kill horse gang not only to let them bring back a clear message, but also to teach you some things. Emo Shanshan's ink-like condensed but refreshing eyebrows frowned. Teach me to kill people? Kill people, or how not to be killed. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, you are the most powerful person in this team. When the horse gang attacks, I can save my life, but the lives of those ordinary soldiers and civilians still depend on you. But a few days ago, you wasted your psyche power to arrange talisman arrays outside the camp, which seems to me to be a waste. He said, you are our big killer, so you should not be used for defense, but for attack. Emo Shanshan was silent for a long time after hearing these words, and then she said, I have been cultivating talisman Taoism since childhood. In my understanding, only divine talisman masters can take the initiative to attack. Ning Ke remembered what Master Yen Sei taught him in Chang and City, and could not help laughing. He looked at her expressionless steamed bun face, which always had some natural joy, and said, who said that talisman masters can't attack before reaching knowing destiny state? As long as it is used properly, even if the steamed bun is frozen hard, it can still kill people. Although Ning Ke had a clear understanding of the grassland horse gang and had dealt with them for many years, the development of the situation was not completely as Ning Ke expected. On the second day, the horse gang stayed away from the grain delivery team, but they did not disperse. Instead, they formed a team again and followed them from a distance. Distance can make people feel beautiful and safe. Although the distance between the horse gang and the grain delivery team had no real meaning for safety, they could clearly feel that the mental pressure of the Yen soldiers and civilians in the team was much less. Even the girls from the Great River Kingdom could occasionally see smiles on their faces. A corner of the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and Emo Shanshan looked at Ning Ke on the big black horse beside the carriage. She looked at his cheeks that were mostly covered by the bamboo hat, and suddenly asked, are you familiar with the wilderness? Ning Ke nodded. Emo Shanshan looked at the shadow cast by the bamboo hat on his face and said, the wind in the wilderness is strong, and ordinary people should not wear bamboo hats. But why do you and many horse gangs wear bamboo hats? Ning Ke hooked the tie on his chin with his little finger and said, with the tie, we are not afraid of being blown away by the wind. As for why we are used to wearing bamboo hats, the sun in the wilderness is too strong, so this thing can block the sun. The most important thing is that it can cover our faces. The purpose of covering their faces was not to be ashamed to see others, but to not let others see their faces. Whether it was the horse gang or him, they always protected their identities very thoroughly. Cat Girl looked at the group of horse gangs that were almost parallel to the grain delivery team in the northeast direction. She frowned and asked, Senior brother, where do these horse gangs come from? This place should not be far from the palace. Does no one care about them? I seem to have answered this question a few days ago. Ning Ke pulled the bamboo hat lower and said, many of the most powerful horse gangs on the grassland have masters. Now the group of horse gangs following us obviously have masters. Cat Girl asked curiously, how do you know? Ning Ke looked at the group of horse gangs in the distance and said after a moment of silence, because these horse gangs are too disciplined. Then who is their master? I don't know. Ning Ke shook his head and thought that there were not many forces on the grassland that could afford to support such a large group of horse gangs. However, as analyzed a few days ago, those forces had no reason to instigate the horse gangs to rob the grain delivery team. The grain delivery team represented the attitude of the countries of the Central Plains and the Left King's Palace. The grain delivery team mainly carried a symbolic meaning, and the quantity was not too much. If the horse gangs came for the grain, they should immediately withdraw when they found that the grain delivery team was very difficult to deal with. Unless the horse gangs did not rob and kill the grain delivery team for the grain, but to break the agreement, or to target someone in the grain delivery team, then this matter would become very tricky. Thinking of this, he subconsciously glanced at the window beside him with the corner of his eyes. A winter wind blew and lifted a corner of the curtain, revealing Mo Shanshan's calm and indifferent face. In his view, the only person in the grain delivery team who was qualified to attract so many horse gangs was the girl in white in the carriage. Of course, when thinking about this problem, he excluded himself in advance, because he believed that no one knew that he was disguised as a male disciple of Black Ink Garden and mixed in the grain delivery team. The situation gradually deteriorated as Ning Ke thought. The atmosphere in the grain delivery team only relaxed for a day, but quickly became more tense and even panicked, because in the next 2 or 3 days, the horse gangs that followed the grain delivery team not only did not leave, but also new small groups of horse gangs appeared continuously and merged with the horse gangs in the distance. This place was not too far from the palace. Even if the elite cavalry came to help, it would only take about 2.5 days to arrive. It was impossible for the grain delivery team to break out of the encirclement with light, so they could only hope for reinforcements. That night 2 bunches of fireworks rose into the night sky from the camp, brightening up the deep night, and also illuminating the mountain-like horse gangs in the distance. Along the way, the fireworks bloomed and the horse gangs converged. The number of horse gangs following the grain delivery team increased, and gradually became a black sea of people and horses. Even if the people in the grain delivery team looked at it, they would feel frightened. Ning Ke became more and more silent. He looked at the more than 600 horse gangs in the distance, and the doubts in his heart became more and more intense. What did these horse gangs want to do? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 216. A simple quantitative analysis could lead to a relatively accurate conclusion. For example, a middle-aged man who had 17 concubines must be rich. An official in Chang, and who had more than 2 of Ning Ke's calligraphy in his study, must not only be rich, but must also have a high status. Therefore, when the number of horse gangs silently following the grain team exceeded 600, the power behind the horse gang quickly surfaced. It was either the Yen Kingdom or the palace. Because in this wilderness, only the Yen Kingdom and the Left King's palace could afford to support so many horse gang. However, Ning Ke still could not understand the purpose of this group of horse gang, because both the Yen Kingdom and the Left King's palace should be very welcoming of the peace talks. Ning Ke became silent, which meant that he was also beginning to feel nervous. There were 200 Yen cavalrymen in the grain team, more than 100 commoners, and a dozen cultivating girls from the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. In the beginning, the strength of the two sides was not that different on paper. He had thought that by frightening the other party, according to the horse gang's usual way of doing things, the other party might retreat. However, seeing that there were more and more horse gang gathered in the wilderness, he finally confirmed that the other party's purpose was not simple robbery, but something else. Now that there were more than 600 horse gang around the grain team, they had a complete advantage in terms of strength. Even if he brought Mo Shanshan with him, and rushed over and killed more than a dozen of them, it would not affect the overall situation. No new horse gang joined the team, and the 600 horse gang followed the grain team slowly north in silence. For some unknown reason, the horse gang did not attack. They seemed to be hesitating, as if they were waiting for an order. However, regardless of whether they attacked or not, the horse gang was there, wandering in the surrounding wilderness, and the people in the grain team were under great psychological pressure. They felt that there was a dark cloud above their heads that could not be blown away by the wind, and instead it was getting lower and lower. The atmosphere was depressing and even desperate. If they were not in the cold wilderness, perhaps the Pale Yen army would have already scattered. An invisible rope became tighter and tighter between the grain delivery team and the horse gang. Although they had not shown their ferocious faces, Ning Ke knew that as they got closer to the palace, the horse gang would lose all opportunities if they did not attack. Therefore, this rope would eventually break. The wilderness was not entirely made up of frost grass and black soil. There were also abandoned mud cities and undulating hills. Around a wilted poplar forest, the grain delivery team temporarily stopped to rest. The Yen general looked at the horse gang outside in fear, but he still sent out scouts. Although it was meaningless, it was at least reassuring. If there are no reinforcements, we won't be able to defend the food team. Now we are not far from the palace. Whether it is the elite cavalry of Chanyu or the cavalry of Divine Hall, they may encounter us. My problem is that even if they can't see the fireworks, you should have a way to inform them since you are such a powerful talisman master. Ning Ke looked away from the map and asked Emo Shanshan beside him. His tone was a little solemn. Emo Shanshan was as calm or indifferent as usual, as if she could not see the horse gang outside. After a period of silence, she looked at Ning Ke and blinked her sparse and long eyelashes. She said, "The Divine Hall is going to escort several important people to the palace. There should be a team of papal cavalrymen. According to their route, they should not be far from us. They should have seen the fireworks last night." Ning Ke stared at her dull and confused eyes and asked, "If they did not see the fireworks, would they know we are here?" Emo Shanshan nodded slightly, her straight black hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. Ning Ke calmed down a little and took out a water bag to drink. After a moment of silence, he said, "If there are no reinforcements, I will retreat first when I can't hold on. Do you want to come with me?" The "you" in this sentence referred to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, not the Yen cavalry and the people from the Yen Kingdom. Cat Girl came to deliver food and happened to hear Ning Ke's words. She blushed and said, Senior brother, how can you do this?" Ning Ke did not explain anything and rubbed the little girl's head lovingly. He looked at Emo Shanshan, who had her head slightly lowered, and continued, "You should know that I am a very cold-blooded guy. The first thing I consider is my own survival. If there are no reinforcements and the horse gang attacks, the grain team will not be able to hold on at all. If you still want everyone to survive at that time, it is equivalent to sending your younger sisters and brothers into a desperate situation. So I hope you can be more resolute when the time comes." Because there were 600 horse gangs spying outside, the grain team was extra vigilant and careful every time they stopped to rest. In addition to sending out scouts, the grain carts would also be densely arranged in a circle to prevent the horse gang from breaking into the camp. Although this would bring a lot of trouble, compared to death, no one would think it was too troublesome. Suddenly, there was a noise under a dying poplar tree. Ning Ke stood up and looked in that direction. He shook his head, put on his mask and walked over. Cat Girl followed behind him curiously. The Yen general stared at Zhuo Zhihua in front of him with a gloomy face and said with hatred, "If it were not for you Southerners, how could I be assigned to such a deadly task? You still want me to hold on and wait for reinforcements in this situation? I only have 200 people and there are at least 700 to 800 horse gang. How can we hold on? How can we fight this battle? My attitude is very clear. I will take my people and break out of the encirclement immediately. As for the grain, it is not a big deal to leave it to the horse gang. As long as people are alive, it is more important than anything else. If you want to die with the grain, that is your own business." Zhuo Zhihua suppressed the anger in her heart and pointed to the frightened people around her. She said, "What about these people? They are the people of the Yen Kingdom. As a general, can you not care about their life and death?" "Who will care about my life and death?" The Yen general waved his hand angrily and signaled his trusted aide to gather the cavalry. He was ready to break out of the encirclement while the horse gang was still far away. Around the winter poplar forest, some of the people of the Yen kingdom heard the conversation and knew that their general was going to abandon them. They immediately fell into a greater panic. There were discussions and cries everywhere. Some of the people even looked at the cavalry with hatred in their eyes. Zhuozhihua and two great River Kingdom girls held the ebony hilts of their swords and stood in front of the Yen general. Zhuozhihua lowered her voice and tried to persuade him, but there was no response. The Yen general saw that the horse gang was getting restless and became even more anxious. He pulled out his saber and stared at the great River Kingdom girls in front of him. He scolded coldly, "If you want to stop me, you will have to ask my saber first." Ning Ke stood behind Zhuozhihua and looked at this scene. He frowned. He still did not know the name of the Yen general, and he did not care about his name. He believed that if the general dared to attack, he would die instantly under Zhuozhihua's sword. However, the situation was tense at this time. If there was an internal dispute or even an internal fight, then the hundreds of people in the grain team would all die, even if the horse gang did not come to attack. How could he keep these 200 Yen cavalrymen here without causing any internal strife? Then he would end the internal conflict as soon as it started. The sparks would be extinguished and the chaos would not start a prairie fire. Ning Ke appeared from behind Zhuozhihua and stood in front of the Yen general. The Yen general looked at the young man wearing a bamboo hat and a black mask. He was slightly stunned. Along the way, he only thought that Ning Ke was an ordinary male disciple of the Black Ink Garden. He did not know why he stood out at this time. Ning Ke looked at the knife in the Yen general's hand. He did not ask if the knife agreed. He pulled out the padao from behind him and slashed at the cold winter wind. The knife rose and fell. The Yen general's head was separated from his body. He spat out blood and fell to the ground. Because it happened so suddenly and Ning Ke's knife was too fast and fierce, he did not even have the chance to raise his knife to block. There was an uproar. The eyes of the Yen general's trusted aides were red. They were about to pull out their knives to fight back, but Ning Ke stopped them one by one. Zhuozhihua, Catgirl, and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom stared at the scene with their mouths agape. They looked at the corpses of the Yen army's generals that were still spurting blood on the ground and were speechless. They did not understand why Ning Ke would do this. Ning Ke gestured for them to use ropes to tie up the high-ranking officers of the Yen army. He stood in the middle of the crowd and looked at the frightened citizens. He looked at the Yen cavalrymen who had complicated expressions of anger and fear. After a moment of silence, he pointed at the horse gang in the wilderness and said, "The horse gang, those are the horse gang. You should know how cruel they are." He looked at the Yen general who was tied up not far from his feet. He then looked up at the crowd and said, "In this dangerous situation, those who want to abandon everyone, those who are afraid of death and want to live alone must die. Those who don't listen to orders will also die. Even if I don't kill you, the horse gang outside will not let you live. So I don't want to kill too many of you. You want to live? Then fight with your lives." It was dead silent in the winter poplar forest. Both the Yen cavalrymen and the people of the Yen kingdom looked at the ordinary-looking male disciple of the Black Ink Garden and his calm eyes outside the black mask. They all felt a deep chill quickly occupying their bodies. Because of the chill, they were calm. Because of the calmness, they understood that what he said was right. Catgirl looked at Ning Ke's back as he walked towards the horse carriage in the forest. She opened her big and bright eyes in confusion and scratched her head. She realized that she could not understand this senior brother of the academy. He had just advised the Hill Master to retreat in advance. Why did he react so strongly when the Yen general was about to leave? The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "Most of the fickle people I know are despicable. I am not a Yen. These Yen cavalry and civilians have nothing to do with me. Their lives have nothing to do with me. But as a Yen general, He has no right to abandon his people. The reason why I killed him has nothing to do with these reasons. It is purely because his death is more beneficial for the rest of us to live. As for being fickle, Ning Ke began to check his bow and arrows. He lowered his head and said, "If we really can't hold on, I still suggest that you leave with me. So my attitude is not fickle. I am the same as that Yen general. We are both afraid of death. The only difference is that I have the ability to kill him, but he does not have the ability to kill me. 3,000 left. Keep fighting." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 217. The winter wind blew in the wilderness all the time. The wind might not be strong, but it was like a comb piercing deep into one's clothes, taking away the warmth of one's body. Emo Shanshan was still wearing that thin white dress. The dark blue belt around her waist was like a deep lake, forming a strong contrast with her flat and unfocused eyes. Her ink-like eyebrows slowly raised as she looked at Ning Ke and asked, "You killed their general. Aren't you worried that the Yen cavalry will hate you and not contribute in the battle, or even surrender to the horse gang? Cultivating trusted officers in the army would definitely harm the interests of the lower-ranked soldiers. So the dead general's relationship with the cavalry is not very good, especially since they are from the Yen kingdom. I am a Tang, I know this very well." Ning Ke used his fingers to carefully check if the straw ropes on the hilts of the 3 swords were strong. He lowered his head and replied, "When I killed the Yen general and subdued the officers, the 200 Yen cavalry were indeed angry, but not sad. That is to say, they are not sad. This anger is more from fear and uneasiness." Emo Shanshan looked at the bamboo hat that covered most of his face and said, "They are afraid of you. Fear makes people want to stay away. Perhaps it is because of this that they might surrender to the horse gang. As a soldier, even if you are a weak soldier from the Yen kingdom, surrendering to the horse gang is a very difficult decision. But such a decision requires thinking, and thinking requires a relaxed mental environment." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the horse gang who were still patrolling in the wilderness but did not attack. He said, "The situation is too tense now. Arrows can fall on their heads at any time. The Yen kingdom's cavalry have no time or environment to think. They are like a herd of wild horses that have lost their leader. As long as one horse rushes out, they will follow it blindly. What I want is for them to follow blindly." Emo Shanshan looked at his profile and asked, "You were in the army before?" Ning Ke nodded. Emo Shanshan gently stroked the hair on her cheek and said after a moment of silence, "Being with you, I can indeed learn a lot." Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. He said, "You are welcome. What you can learn from me is actually not good. If possible, I hope that I will never have the chance to learn these things in my life." After losing their high and mighty generals and officers who only knew how to suck up to them, the 200 Yen cavalrymen were not that sad. They were just a little angry. And it was precisely because they had lost their leaders that their anger quickly turned into helplessness. In the end, they just quietly obeyed. Any army that was good at fighting must have its own unique temperament. Unfortunately, the Yen army did not have such temperament. If it were any other Tang army, they would not have obediently obeyed the enemy's command after their general was killed. Ning Ke was very satisfied with the unique temperament of the Yen army. He did not appear in front of the curtain to personally command. Instead, he passed down the orders through Emo Shanshan's carriage. Zhuo Zhihua and the other 3 disciples of Black Ink Garden temporarily replaced the positions of the Yen military officers. They reorganized the camp, recalled the sentries, and strengthened the defense. All the orders were carried out as quickly as possible. No one, including the Yen cavalry, had any complaints. The order and atmosphere were even better than before. The grain team continued their journey north, with over 600 horse gang following them. According to the orders from the carriage, The speed of the entire grain team was precisely controlled within a certain range. They were constantly changing their speed, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Although this was undoubtedly a torture for the Yen cavalry and the people driving the carriages, they still managed to persevere, and caused some trouble for the horse gang. The most dangerous part of the twilight was spent in silence. The grain team dragged into a long line and wearily entered a low-lying area in the wilderness. The sky was already dark and the light was blurry. The so-called low-lying area was due to the rising meadows on both sides. In the dark, one could not see the end of it. It was like the mountain valleys in the south, just that the terrain was slightly gentler and not as steep. The dozens of Yen cavalrymen who were leading the way were surprised when they heard the whistle from behind. The whistle meant that the grain team had decided to set up camp here. Anyone with some military knowledge would not choose to set up camp in such a low-lying area. There were meadows on both sides of the low-lying area. If the hundreds of horse gang used the terrain to rush down, the grain team would be stretched into a long line. The fragile defense would be broken in a short time. It was extremely dangerous. Then, the latest orders came from the carriage. The grain team was to form a formation and break the carriage boards to act as a shield. However, they did not ask the people to dig pits or set up tripping ropes in the dark areas on both sides. It gave the impression that the people in the carriage had given up on defense and were waiting for the horse gang to attack. The last rays of twilight came from the sky, reflecting the blood of the dying struggle. The low-lying area where the grain team set up camp was already dark. One could vaguely see people hurriedly dismantling the carriage boards and smoke rising from the kitchen. Suddenly, the smoke that had just risen not too high suddenly stopped, as if it was frozen by the cold air. The busy people raised their heads to look at the meadow on their left. Their bodies suddenly stiffened and there was silence. Hundreds of horse gang appeared on the meadow a few hundred feet away. This was the closest the horse gang had been to the grain team in the past few days. The black mass of horse gang controlled the reins and stood indifferently above. Under the light of the setting sun, it looked like a dense forest that was burning fiercely, giving off an extremely strong sense of oppression. Ning Ke lifted his bamboo hat a little and looked at the horse gang in a strict formation on the meadow. He slowly frowned. He noticed that the horse gang today was more disciplined and more silent. None of the horse gang rode their horses to provoke them. He noticed that there were more than 10 riders at the front of the horse gang. The reason why he said there were more than 10 riders was because he was sure that these 10 or so horse bandits with their faces covered had never appeared in his line of sight in the past few days. This meant that these 10 or so horse bandits had just arrived today, and the alarming change in the ranks of the horse bandits was due to the arrival of these horse bandits. Even if they are not the representatives of the forces behind them, these 10 riders should be the ones in charge. Ning Ke looked at the horse gang who were pointing at the camp with their horsewhip. He looked at the cloth that covered their faces and said in a low voice, "If there is a chance, think of a way to kill these 10 riders. Maybe we can get out of this." Mo Shanshan stood beside his shoulder and looked indifferently in that direction. She said, "You once said that the horse gang's target is not the grain. Killing people to intimidate them will not work. The horse gang is the horse gang. The horse gang that is kept by others is still the horse gang. They are more afraid of death than anyone else. And I believe that whether it is the palace or the Prince of Yen, if they want to keep so many horse gang in the wilderness, they have to keep them separately." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "This means that these horse gang do not belong to each other. They only listen to the leader of the horse gang who just arrived today. Kill these people and the horse gang will definitely lose their fighting spirit." Then, he looked at her and added seriously, "Again, you are the strongest person in the whole team, so you must not fight until the last moment. Otherwise, it will be a waste." Mo Shanshan's eyelids drooped slightly. Her sparse long eyelashes rested on her fair skin, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. She was very beautiful. Her slightly puffed cheeks were very cute, but her silence was unbearable. Ninkei ignored her and took the heavy package off the back of the big black horse. He stuffed it into the horse carriage behind him and said seriously, "The things in the package are very important to me. Keep them safe for me." Emo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. She said, "Your secret?" Ninkei said, "That's right. You seem to have a lot of secrets." "You have many too," Ninkei said. Emo Shanshan squinted her eyes and asked, "Why are you not worried about the horse gang's night attack along the way?" Ninkei looked at her squinted eyes and the beautiful little wrinkles at the corner of her eyes. He could not help but think of the leaves of a certain plant like a willow. The reason is very simple. It is because it is difficult to find the hidden property of the caravan at night. They wait until the day to search, but they are afraid that the border army will see the warning and come to search. Moreover, a night attack will reduce their riding and archery skills. Their most incisive methods will be reduced, and this is something that the horse gang cannot bear. It is rare for them to follow us for so many days. Emo Shanshan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Since it is rare, why can't they launch a night attack?" Ninkei found that he could easily be defeated by this girl in white. After a moment of silence, he said, "These are the principles that the ancestors of the horse gang summed up with blood and death. They will not deviate from them. Or it can be said that they do not want to deviate from them, because it is already an instinct that is deeply rooted in their bones." Ninkei looked at her and said, "Just like when you write a talisman, you do not need to think about how to write that talisman. The ink brush in your hand will make a choice in advance before your thinking and move on its own." Emo Shanshan looked at him quietly and asked, "You also know talisman?" Ninkei smiled gently and answered, "A little." Perhaps it was because of the impending battle, or perhaps it was because the twilight was too beautiful and the night was too close, but in his eyes, Emo Shanshan had become much more pleasing to the eye. Although her gaze was still proud, cold and dull, he thought to himself that with her reputation and status in the world, it was only right. At the same time, Emo Shanshan also felt that this young Tang man had become more pleasing to the eye. That night, Ninkei spent the night with the Yen cavalry at the back of the group. He ordered the Yen cavalry to sleep with his horse, and was not allowed to take off their armor. He also put on a light armor of the Yen army. "Reinforcements are on the way. As long as we can last until noon, we will win." Beside the bonfire, he looked at the confused and even numb Yen cavalry and said seriously. There was finally a change in the Yen cavalry's expression. There was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Ninkei did not know if there would be reinforcements. He only knew that the horse gang would definitely attack the next morning. If the situation was not right, he would not hesitate to ride the big black horse and escape. But he could not forget to bring his bag. He should also bring Cat Girl and Zhuojihua. Emo Shanshan should also. It seemed that there were too many things and people to bring. Completed on Monday, continue tomorrow. I seem to have promised too many days. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 218. At some point in the morning, the horse gang, who had been following the grain team for more than 10 days, finally launched their attack. The first sound to break the darkness was not the sound of a horn, but the shrill sound of arrows. Hundreds of arrows drew arcs in the air as they shot down from above the meadow. They tore through the cold air and the lingering sleepiness in the camp, whistling as they plunged down. Even though the grain team was mentally and physically prepared for the attack, they still fell into chaos. In the rain of arrows, they screamed in fear and hid in all directions, trying their best to crawl into the carriages around the caravan. The sharp and ice-cold arrowheads pierced through the sturdy carriage boards and were unable to penetrate any further. However, there were still some arrows that easily pierced through the torsos and limbs of the civilians and soldiers, causing blood to spurt out and causing miserable howls of pain. In the blink of an eye, they had caused great damage and death. The Yen cavalry at the southernmost part of the low-lying land was not in the camp. They were attacked by the arrows at almost the same time, but because of Ning Kei's reminder last night, they reacted faster. They all picked up simple shields in front of them or hid behind the rocks, watching the arrows fly over their heads nervously. The Yen horses neighed and galloped in the low-lying land. A few horses could not withstand the arrow wounds on their bodies and fell heavily to the ground. Ning Kei ordered the Yen cavalry to ignore the thinning arrow rain and gather their mounts as quickly as possible. "Everyone, get on your horses and prepare to charge." Ning Kei jumped onto the big black horse and looked up at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. He was familiar with the horse gang's fighting style. These bandits did not have any supplies and did not have the habit of carrying a large number of arrows with them. Even though they had planned this attack for a long time, the horse gang still could not deal a fatal blow to the grain team by attacking from a distance. In the end, the horse gang still had to charge through the camp. It was as if a black forest had suddenly sprouted at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. Hundreds of mounted bandits dressed in leather armor and thick cloth appeared there silently. The scimitars in their hands seemed exceptionally cold under the first ray of sunlight. It was so cold that everyone in the low-lying area breathed heavily. On the slope of the meadow, a masked horse gang at the front slowly raised the machete in his hand and gave the order to attack. Ning Kei noticed that the horse gang leader was not holding a machete, but a straight one. Hundreds of mounted bandits dashed down the meadow in the direction of the straight blade. In the beginning, the clattering of hooves was a little messy and slow, but as the horses sped up, it became more and more concentrated and orderly. Over 1,000 strong hooves stomped heavily on the slightly hardened surface of the meadow, causing the entire ground to shake. In the early hours of the morning, the wilderness was like a boundless drum. The orderly sound of horse hooves was like a heavy hammer falling on the surface of the drum. Every time the drum fell, the earth would shake. The sound of the drum was like thunder, and the sound of horse hooves was like thunder. The camp, which had just been baptized by the rain of arrows, had just calmed down a little from the chaos. The soldiers and commoners, who were holding weapons and even wooden sticks, guarding behind the carts, could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. They heard the deafening hoofbeats, and looked at the horse gang coming down like a black flood from above the meadow. They could not help but show a look of despair. At this moment, more than 10 disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom tightly grasped the black wooden handles at their waist. They pulled out slender swords and stood up. They shouted at the soldiers and civilian workers beside them to raise the weapons in their hands and walked to the back of the carriage. These disciples of Black Ink Garden were only teenagers. This time, they had received an edict from the Divine Hall and came to the wilderness for training. Before this, they had never seen such a dangerous and bloody battlefield. However, the people of the Great River Kingdom, who were deeply influenced by the temperament of the Tang Empire, were also persevering and did not know what fear was. Looking at the approaching horse gang, the ferocious faces of the horse gang, the bright scimitars in the hands of the horse gang, and listening to the arrogant whistling of the horse gang, the young and childish faces of the Black Ink Garden disciples did not show a trace of nervousness or despair, because the calmness made them more determined and resolute. The calmness and determination of the Great River Kingdom girls influenced the Yen soldiers and civilian workers in the camp. They subconsciously raised the crude wooden spears in their hands. Although their hands holding the spears were still trembling uncontrollably, at least they finally had the courage to face the bleak situation and the ferocious enemies. The sound of horse hooves was getting louder and louder, and the horse gang was getting closer. The smoke and dust between the meadow slopes at dawn was getting thicker, the air was getting colder, and the atmosphere was getting more and more tense. Everyone in the camp had panic in their eyes, but they still had a glimmer of hope. They breathed faster and faster, waiting for the moment when the horse gang would rush to the front of the carriage. Ning Kei was also waiting, but the time he waited was shorter. He looked at the faintly discernible 100-horse gang on the meadow to the northwest. These horse gang had snuck in last night, and now they appeared on the meadow. However, they did not charge at the Yen cavalry. It was obvious that they wanted to suppress the Yen cavalry, so that the 500 horse gang could gather all their strength and charge at the camp successfully. Ning Ke would not fight with these 100 horse gang. He turned his head to look at the smoke and dust on the meadow slope to the north, and saw that the hundreds of horse gang were about to rush down the slope and into the low-lying area. He pulled down the bamboo hat on his head and pulled out the padao from his back, signaling the 200 Yen cavalry following him to get ready to charge. "Don't ask how to charge, just follow my horse." He looked at the nervous Yen cavalryman beside him and said this without any pre-battle encouragement. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pointed his padao at the meadow on his right and kicked the horse's abdomen with both legs. The big black horse neighed twice, kicked its hooves, and galloped forward like an arrow. The 500 mounted bandits were like a black tide. They relied on the gentle slope of the meadow to increase their speed. In the span of a breath, they had already charged down the meadow and arrived at the low-lying area between two meadows. The low-lying area was covered with black soil and coarse gravel. It looked rather solid and was about 100 feet wide. The camp of the grain team was in the center of the area. With the speed of the horse gang, it would not take them too long to reach the camp from the low-lying area. What was more frightening was that if there were no traps or tripwires to slow down the horse gang, the hundreds of horse gang could easily crush the grain team camp with their speed. There were no tripping ropes or pits. There were no obstacles on the flat and solid low-lying ground. The soldiers and commoners at the back of the caravan looked at the clearly visible faces of the horse gang and felt a chill down their spines. Their hands, which were tightly holding onto their spears, trembled even more violently than before. If they did not know that they would die if they surrendered and fled, they would probably just need someone to shout and everyone would throw down their weapons and scatter in all directions. There was a great disparity in strength between them and the grain team. The grain team was located below the meadow, and they had lost the terrain. Without any preparation, how could they stop the ferocious horse gang? It seemed that there was no way to save the grain team. Although the 200 Yen cavalrymen from the south had already started galloping towards them, the horse gang had already charged into the camp and started a massacre by the time they arrived. Furthermore, the 200 Yen cavalrymen did not choose to come to their aid in a straight line. Instead, they strangely ran towards the meadow slope in the east. What were they trying to do? The cavalrymen slowed down when they ran up the slope, and it was extremely exhausting. Did they want to become the target of the horse gang's arrows, or were they trying to escape? Thinking of Ning Ke's insistence on not setting up any tripping ropes and traps last night, and seeing the 200 Yen cavalrymen running towards the east, Zhuo Zhihua had a bad feeling. She did not want to admit that the senior brother from the academy was such a despicable person, but other than being afraid of death, what else could explain his actions? There was no time for Zhuo Zhihua and the girls from the Great River Kingdom to feel sad and indignant. They could only use the corner of their eyes to look at the Yen cavalrymen and the big black horse in front of them, which seemed to be getting further and further away. The horse gang surged towards them like a black cloud, their 1,000 hooves kicking up 1,000 black gravel and dust. There was a heavy thud. For some unknown reason, one of the mounted bandits at the very front fell heavily on the hard black gravel ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. The warhorse whined and could no longer stand up. Its front hooves seemed to have been broken. Following that, there was a series of heavy thud. Dozens of cavalrymen at the front of the crazily charging horse gang fell miserably on the ground, just like the horse gang at the front. The valley was in a state of chaos. Zhuo Zhihua, who was gripping her sword tightly, did not know what had happened. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Then, the confusion in her eyes turned into ecstasy, as more and more horse gang fell on the seemingly hard black gravel ground. The horse gang charged down the gentle slope of the meadow. By the time they reached the low-lying land in the middle of the meadow, their speed had already been raised to the maximum. Under normal circumstances, this speed would undoubtedly be the most perfect. However, the problem was that this was not a normal charge, because this low-lying land was not normal ground. In the desolate and cold wilderness, it was rare to see a low-lying land between two long sloping meadows. This place was originally an ancient river, but it had dried up and disappeared thousands of years ago, leaving only the remains of the riverbed. As the sand and wind attacked and piled up, the appearance of the river could no longer be seen. The two sides of the river had turned into green meadows in spring and frosty white in winter, and the riverbed had also turned into seemingly solid black gravel. Even the horse gang, who ran amuck in the wilderness, did not know that this low-lying land was an ancient river. Ning Ke did not know either. But last night, when he brought the grain team here and set up camp, he discovered the problem of this low-lying land. Under the thin layer of sand, all were round pebbles that were as smooth as before. The middle of the ancient river was deep, and the soil accumulated over thousands of years was the thickest. Coupled with the dead vegetation, there was not much problem for horses to travel. However, the edge of the ancient river bank, which was now the edge of the two meadows, was only covered with a very shallow layer of black gravel. If one exerted a little more force, or even if the wind was a little stronger, it was possible to touch or see the round pebbles below, as well as the irregular natural pits. This was not a trap. It was not a trap set by Hautian for the horse gang. If the speed was not too fast, even the heaviest Nanshan horse carrying two people would not be trapped in the accumulated gravel over the years. However, the horse gang rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow, and their speed was too fast. The impact force between the horses' hooves and the ground was too great. Therefore, the edge of the low-lying land under the gentle slope of the meadow became a trap set by Hautian for the horse gang. The horses' hooves moved so fast that they almost left afterimages. They stepped heavily on the low-lying land, and their strong hooves sank deeply into the gravel. They wanted to get up, but they slid away. Because they were moving too fast, the war horse could not maintain its balance, and fell heavily with the horse gang on it. A horse's hooves kicked away the black gravel, but it happened to be stuck between the round stones under the ground. At such a high speed, the war horse could not stop its downward momentum, and its heavy body was pressed horizontally. With a crack, the horse's hooves were broken, revealing blood-colored muscles and white periosteum. It was a tragic sight to behold. The dozens of mounted bandits at the front had fallen, and the majority of the mounted bandits at the back had already noticed the problem. However, because of the damned reason, their speed was too fast. They were unable to pull the reins to stop their charge. One after another, the horses charged into the edge of the low-lying area, and then fell heavily onto the ground, letting out dull thuds from time to time. If the hundreds of horse gang that rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow were like a black tide, then the seemingly ordinary black gravel outside the camp of the grain team was like the famous breakwater on the coast of the Song Kingdom, a subsidiary of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Countless invisible round stone pillars appeared, hard and mercilessly smashing the tide. The tide came in wave after wave, and broke into foam wave after wave. The waves in front fell first, and the waves behind followed. Each wave was higher than the last, and each wave pressed on the last, and each wave was more miserable than the one before. The scene in the slanting valley was extremely bloody and cruel. Countless horses fell to the ground, and countless horse gang fell to the ground, their legs broken by the heavy bodies of the horses. They frantically pushed the horses, but it was useless. The lucky horses and horse gang directly fainted or died, while the unlucky horses and horse gang were howling in pain, especially the horse gang at the back, who had charged at high speed but fell miserably. They were densely squeezed together, and blood oozed out like pulp, smearing on the ground under the morning light. The fighting power of the horse gang was much stronger than that of the grain team. Although there were at least 100 horse gang casualties in the previous charge, as long as they were given time to regroup, even if they abandoned their horses and charged on foot, they would still bring great pressure and danger to the camp. If the hundreds of people in the camp of the grain team were the elite soldiers of the Tang army who were good at fighting, or even if they were ordinary soldiers, they could rush out of the formation of wagons with weapons and kill a horse gang with a casual stab. Perhaps the first wave of the horse gang's charge would be repelled. Unfortunately, most of the people in the camp were farmers. Under the protection of the wooden shields, they might have the courage to defend with wooden sticks and spears, but they did not have the courage to charge out of the camp to kill the enemy. More importantly, the 300 horse gang at the back had narrowly avoided the natural traps in the low-lying land. At this moment, they were holding bows and arrows, vigilantly observing the movements in the camp. Therefore, whether or not they could defeat the first attack of the horse gang depended on the 200 yen cavalrymen in the south. At this moment, the people in the camp understood that the 200 yen cavalrymen abandoned the valley and chose to ascend the meadow not to escape, but to avoid the traps that Haotian had hidden in the ancient river. The 200 yen cavalrymen moved ahead of time. However, as they were charging in the opposite direction of the meadow, it was a huge drain on their horsepower. Therefore, they were not fast, especially when compared to the big black horse that looked like a bolt of black lightning. The moment the Yen cavalrymen moved, the 100-horse gang who were monitoring and suppressing the Yen cavalrymen on the meadow to their left immediately moved. These horse gang rushed down the meadow as fast as they could, wanting to make a detour and kill the Yen cavalrymen from the side. However, they did not expect the Yen cavalrymen to not follow the center of the slanting valley, but towards the meadow instead. The 100-horse gang saw that they could not catch up with the Yen cavalrymen. They waved their whips and whistled as they increased their speed. The sound of hooves thundered down the meadow, and they suffered the same fate as their companions who were charging in the north. The cold winter wind of the wilderness hit Ninkei's face, making his cheeks feel hot. Ninkei heard the cries of pain coming from behind and knew that the horse gang would not be able to catch up with him. He calmed himself down and began to think of some strange questions. The cold wind could make my face hot. Was it because the wind was too strong and caused friction? But if that was the reason, how thick and hard must my skin be? Being able to remain calm in the face of a major event was a description of some outstanding human qualities. However, temperament was cultivated later on. Ninkei was used to seeing life and death since he was young. He had been through many trials and tribulations. Whenever he encountered a major event that involved life and death, he would habitually think about trivial things and then return his emotions to extreme calmness. Just like how his hands, which were holding the boxwood bough, were so calm that even when the wind blew against them, they did not tremble at all. Step, step. Straighten. Draw the bow. Mispoint. Twist the rope. Release. When the arrow left the bowstring, it was like dew dripping from the surface of a leaf. It was slow and then slightly deformed. The center of the arrow bulged outwards. With the rotation, the bulge drew an arc in the air. The arrowhead was swaying and the feather tail was swaying. It followed a complicated curve and finally became a straight line, tearing the air and flying into the distance. The arrowhead lightly touched the rough skin that had been tortured by the scorching sun and wild wind. It was like tearing the air, easily tearing the skin like paper and tearing the flesh like cotton, bringing out thick blood and broken bones. It did not stop swaying until it pierced deep into the throat. However, the feather tail was still swaying, but it became faster and made a buzzing sound when it trembled. 3 horse gang members were shot in their throat. Blood spurted out and they fell off their horses before they could even scream. Ninkei's bamboo hat was tied tightly by the rope. No matter how strong the winter wind in the wilderness was, it could not be blown off. There was no emotion in Ninkei's eyes that were exposed outside the mask. He only focused on the approaching horse gang. Nearly 200 horse gang members were trapped between the round rocks at the edge of the low-lying land. They were in a sorry state. 300 horse gang members were at the back, trying to forcefully rein in their territory. Their formation was extremely chaotic, especially the defense on the side. If there was a broadsword that forcefully slashed down from the side of the horse gang would definitely be defeated. He led 200 yen cavalrymen and charged diagonally from the meadow. He wanted to make such a broadsword. There are still 5,000 words left today, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 219. Both speed and slowness had their advantages and disadvantages. This was neither a dialectic nor a philosophical question, but a very simple truth. The horse gang charged down from the meadow, and because they were too fast, they fell into the rocks in a pathetic state. The big black horse, on the other hand, was too fast. Even with Ning-Kei's archery skills, he could only shoot 3 arrows before he reached the edge of the horse gang. He carried the boxwood bow on his shoulder and stretched his hands forward to hold the pedal on the saddle. He raised his arm and swung his elbow. The blade broke through the air and cut off half of a horse gang's shoulder. Then, he straightened his waist and straightened his arm. The sharp tip of the pedal pierced through the eyeball of another horse gang before the machete could reach him. As the 3 horses crossed each other like lightning, the blood from the horse gang's broken shoulder and the fluid from the eyeball spurted out, spraying all over Ning-Kei's face and body. The smell of blood mixed with other smells, and it was very strange. It was said that blood was hot and the wind was cold. However, Ning-Kei felt that the wind that blew on his face was hot, and the blood that splashed on his face was cold. Because he was very calm. Even now, he still clearly remembered the battle principle that he had followed for many years. Killing the horse gang was never as good as injuring them. If a horse gang died, then so be it. If he was seriously injured and could not die immediately, then he would be a burden to his fellow horse gang members. Although this kind of thinking was cruel, it was very useful. Looking at the dozens of horse gang charging towards him, Ning-Kei took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the big black horse. He held his pedal horizontally and turned into a blade as he charged forward. Behind him, the 200 yen cavalrymen finally caught up. They formed a line and attacked the side of the horse gang that was still in disarray. The winter wind in the wilderness blew again, but it could not blow the hair on Ning-Kei's forehead. This was because his hair was already soaked in the horse gang's blood. At this moment, it was sticky and tangled together, just like Ning-Kei's conflicted feelings. The campsite was a mess, and there were already a few gaps in the formation of carriages. The horse gang temporarily retreated, but the wave of attack before they retreated still caused great damage to the camp. The camp was full of people and soldiers who were covered in blood and had numb eyes. If it weren't for the Great River Kingdom's girls, the camp would have been broken by the horse gang. The situation of the horse gang was not much better. At the edge of the low-lying land, not far from the camp, many horses with broken hooves and serious injuries were lying on the cold ground, struggling for their lives. From time to time, they would shake their heavy heads. Under or beside the horses, there were many cold corpses of the horse gang. However, all the wounded members of the horse gang were brought back by their companions. From this, it could be seen that although the horse gang was severely injured, they did not collapse. They still had the ability and spirit to launch another attack. Ning-Kei raised his arm to wipe away the trickle of blood between his eyebrows. He turned around to look at the northwest direction of the campsite. The Yen cavalry was fighting with a group of horse gangs as they gradually moved further away. He could not help but shake his head. In the eyes of the people of the Central Plains, the horse bandits of the grasslands were the most ferocious existence in the world. But he, who had dealt with the horse bandits for many years, thought that they were the most cowardly and useless existence in the world. Ferociousness was just a cover for the weakness in their hearts. At this moment, the 600 horse gangs around the meadow were ferocious and dared to directly slaughter the tribes of the palace. If they were timid, a group of Tang soldiers would be able to chase after them. The key was strength. The horse gang was a realistic creature and was most sensitive to the difference in strength. Hence, they were the easiest to break up. Ning Ke thought that he was familiar with the nature of the horse gang. When he chose the campsite last night, he had hidden the geographical advantage and picked the right timing. He had thought that with 200 yen cavalry charging at the side of the horse gang, he would be able to crush the 500 horse gang. However, he had forgotten that the ones charging at the horse gang with him were not his old buddies from the city of Wei, nor were they the Tang cavalry from the West Army of the Blue Water Battalion in the south. They were the Yen cavalry with extremely low combat power. The combat power of the Yen cavalry was even worse than Ning Ke's worst-case scenario. The 200 Yen cavalry had used the geographical advantage to charge at the horse gang. However, they did not manage to scatter the horse gang. They were not even able to penetrate the horse gang and were dragged into a battle with the horse gang. After a few rounds of attacks, dozens of Yen cavalry were killed by the horse gang. If not for the fact that the horse gang's formation was in a mess, this long-planned attack might have caused the Yen cavalry to be completely annihilated. The Yen cavalry and the horse gang fought for a while. Both sides could not take it anymore and temporarily separated. Ning Ke took this opportunity to ride the big black horse back to the campsite. On one hand, he did not have much hope for the remaining 100 Yen cavalry. On the other hand, he felt an inexplicable sense of wariness in his heart. A sharp whistle suddenly sounded in the cold air. Ning Ke reacted quickly and leaned to the side. An arrow flew past his clothes and hit a carriage wheel, the tail of the arrow shaking violently. He did not care that his black mask was stained with the horse gang's blood and smelled bad. He put the mask back on and took down the boxwood bough on his back. He pulled the string and shot a horse gang member who had rushed to the campsite. Then, he felt a slight soreness in his shoulder. He knew that he had pulled the bough too many times today. If he continued like this, his right arm might be crippled. The horse gang obviously did not want to give the people in the campsite too much time to rest. After a short rest, they attacked fiercely again. They did not care about their own injuries at all. This kind of reckless action that had nothing to do with benefits and risks had exceeded Ning Ke's understanding of the horse gang. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. More than 200 horse gang members rushed over from all directions. The civilians, who had already become numb to life and death, gathered unprecedented courage at the last moment of life and death. They carried their crude wooden spears and pierced through the gaps in the formation of the carriages. A wooden spear pierced through the chest of a horse gang member. Blood flowed freely. Then, 3 horse gang members crawled through the formation of carriages. They waved their machetes and hacked the civilians holding the wooden spears until they were covered in blood. A snow-white sword light flashed. The slender and elegant sword chopped at the 3 horse gang members with the sound of sword chi. 1 horse gang member was beheaded on the spot. The other 2 horse gang members had their legs and limbs broken. They retreated awkwardly. Covered in blood, the commoners surged forward like wild beasts, holding wooden sticks and stones that they had picked up from somewhere. They surrounded the 2 horse gang members and smashed them down. They numbly repeated their actions, not knowing how many times they had smashed them. Only when there was no longer any sound from inside did they stiffly stop. After Cat Girl chopped against the wind, she habitually let out a cute shout. Then, she was shocked by the bloody scene in front of her. Her red face was covered with dust, but it could not hide the fear and panic in her clear eyes. After all, she was too young and had never seen such a scene. Ning Ke grabbed her by the back of her neck and threw her to the back like a cat. He dodged an arrow and held his knife with one hand to block it. Then, he took advantage of the momentum and cut off the right arm of a horse gang member who was sneaking up on him. The horse gang member covered his bleeding right shoulder and knelt on the ground in pain. Ning Ke did not even look at him. He held his padao and went to the next dangerous place. He knew that the horse gang member with a broken arm and no knife would be drowned by the civilians in the next moment. So, he did not want to waste any more energy. Once the formation of carriages was broken, everyone in the camp would die. Based on this simple understanding, both the civilians and the soldiers of the Yen kingdom became extremely valiant at this moment. They took any weapons they could find and desperately attacked the horse gang that climbed over the carriages. But it was the Black Ink Garden disciples from the Great River Kingdom who made the camp hold on for such a long time. These young girls and boys did not have much battlefield experience. Relying on their pride, perseverance, and excellent swordsmanship given by their sex, they slashed out streaks of sword chi in the meadow of the wilderness and killed the troublesome horse gang members. However, there were too many horse gang members and too few Black Ink Garden disciples. Although the civilians and soldiers fought hard, they could not change the overall situation. The camp was surrounded by danger and could be broken through at any time. It seemed that they had reached a desperate situation. At this moment, a clear sound of flute came from the carriage in the center of the camp. Hearing the sound of flute, Zhuozhihua, Cat Girl and other Black Ink Garden disciples became spirited. They did not care about their psyche power and stacked their sword chi to force the horse gang members to retreat. Then, they walked to the grain bags. Hearing the sound of flute and observing these scenes, Ning Ke felt a little solemn. There was even a hint of anger in his eyes that were exposed outside the black mask. This was the team that transported the grain to the Lieutenant Palace. They were escorted by Yen cavalry and needed mules and horses to transport the grain. Therefore, in addition to many carriages of grain, they also brought a lot of hay for the mules and horses to eat. The unloading boards of the grain wagons formed a circular formation. The cloth bags filled with hay were all gathered under the board. On the one hand, it was used to strengthen the fortification, and on the other hand, it could reduce the damage caused by arrows. Hearing the sound of flute, the Black Ink Garden disciples came to the front of these straw bags and used their swords to lift them into the air outside the formation. At this moment, the most concentrated wave of horse gang members attacked again. Not knowing whether it was because of the sword chi of the Black Ink Garden disciples or some other reason, more than 10 bags of hay flew into the air. Suddenly, the cloth bags burst open and fell apart with a hissing sound. The hay in the bags seemed to have been punched hard and scattered around at an extremely fast speed, like a grass rain. At the same time that the sacks of hay burst open and scattered in all directions, an extremely dry smell enveloped the entire camp. In between each sack of hay, a faint spark could be seen faintly shining, and then in an instant the entire sky was set ablaze. The grass rain turned into a fire rain and fell from the sky. It covered the light of the eastern sun and turned the entire periphery of the camp into a sea of fire. The horse gang members who were dazed by this strange scene did not even have time to react before they were engulfed by the sea of fire. They became pitiful people who were about to drown or burn to death. The peasants and soldiers in the camp were also stunned by this scene. They held all kinds of weapons and looked at the sea of fire that was so close to them, but none of them flew into the formation of carriages. It was as if they had seen the miracle of Haotian. Only Ning Ke noticed the sudden change in the primordial chi between heaven and earth when the hay bags burst open and burned. He felt the faint talisman power in each bag of hay and even saw the subtle picture when the talisman paper was burning. The talisman fire was ignited by the hay and quickly burned and spread. It fell on the horse gang members and was extremely difficult to extinguish. The horse gang members who rushed to the front of the formation were on fire. They howled miserably and ran around. Some rolled on the ground, but they were still rolling in the fire. Some looked around for clean water, but it was not easy to find water in the winter wilderness. Several horse gang members who were on fire howled and rushed into the formation. They did not even have time to lift their machetes and fell to the ground in pain. The horse gang finally retreated again, leaving dozens of charred bodies outside the camp. Many of the bodies were hugging each other tightly. It was probably the panic before death that made the horse gang members unable to distinguish who was the enemy and who was the friend. A burning smell floated in the air. A cheer of victory echoed in the camp. Ning Ke stared at the girl in white in the horse carriage and said, I have reminded you that you are the strongest among us and your psyche power is our most precious weapon. You should use it at the most appropriate time and not casually. Emo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. It was unknown whether it was because she had seen too many bloody scenes or other reasons, but her face was very pale at this time, even whiter than the white dress she was wearing. Many people have died. If I did not help, more people would have died just now. Ning Ke looked at her and said, You are too soft-hearted. Emo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly and she replied, I am a woman. Ning Ke suppressed his anger and mocked, You are not married yet. Emo Shanshan calmly replied, Even if I am married, I will not marry you. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, If you still have psyche power, you must leave the last bit to me. He was a talisman cultivator, and was very clear about the consumption of psyche power by talisman Taoism. The girl's pale and haggard cheeks showed that she had consumed too much psyche power these days. He had to admit that in the whole team, the girl in white was the strongest. Therefore, he could not help but feel angry in the face of such a situation. The horse gang suffered heavy casualties under the fire talisman, but there were at least 200 horse gang members above the meadow who still had the strength to fight. Emo Shanshan's psyche power was exhausted, and his real state was only no doubt state, so he could not resist at all. Of course, Ning Ke still had some trump cards to save his life. But things like the primordial 13 arrows and the brocade pouch given to him by his master would be a great waste if they were used on these horse gang members. Before his life was really in danger, he would never use them, even though he was just a little less stingy than Sang Sang. The key was the reinforcements. The grain team camp had lasted for such a long time, but the reinforcements he had imagined never appeared. If he had been sure that there would not be any reinforcements from the beginning, he would have already escaped on the big black horse. Are there any reinforcements? He stared into Emo Shanshan's eyes and asked. Emo Shanshan looked back at him coldly and said, Only the reinforcements know. Ning Ke did not try to communicate with her anymore and said directly, Get ready to break through. My horse can only take one person. I will take Catgirl, and you will be responsible for your people. Emo Shanshan asked, Then what about the Yen soldiers and civilians who have been fighting with you for such a long time? Ning Ke answered, I just met them by chance, and we are not comrades. Emo Shanshan shook her head gently and said, I will not leave. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly said, Haven't you noticed that the horse gang's target on the meadow is to kill you? Apart from you, who else in the grain team is worth paying such a big price for? Emo Shanshan looked at him and said calmly, If the horse gang's target is me, then these people will die because of me. All the more reason for me not to leave them. Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and said, Idiot, if you leave, you can attract the horse gang's attention. Then why would the horse gang attack the Yen soldiers and civilians who are not a threat? Emo Shanshan smiled slightly and said, You don't have to lie to me. I now understand how cruel the horse gang is. Ning Ke suddenly realized that her usually listless eyes had become exceptionally clear and certain, as if she could easily see through his thoughts. He looked at her for a long time, then turned around and left. The horse gang on the meadow was gathering, and there might be another attack in the next moment. He used his palm to wipe away the coagulated blood on his face, and changed into a new mask. As he walked through the camp full of corpses and broken soldiers, both the Yen soldiers and civilians would automatically avoid him when they saw him covered in blood. Even Zhuo Zhihua and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom looked at him with admiration and fear. Since the battle with the horse gang so far, apart from the fire talisman that burned the sky, the main reason why the grain team could still survive was because of Ningquebec. He had killed many horse gang members with his padao. Many people saw how he killed the horse gang. He killed people like grass without a sound. What made people feel the most cold and awe-inspiring was the calmness with which he killed the horse gang. This calmness seemed to contain some kind of indifference towards life. Feeling the strange eyes from all around, especially the timid look of Catgirl, Ning Kai did not explain anything. He quietly ordered people to repair the cart array, and at the same time, he used his peripheral vision to observe the surrounding meadow and valley, thinking about the escape route. The horse gang was afraid of death, and so was he. However, he knew a fact better than most horse gang members. The braver you were in the face of death, the more difficult it was for you to die. This was the precious experience gained from countless years of life and death experiences since childhood. As for indifference to life, he had always been indifferent to the lives of the horse gang. The reason why the horse gang by the Shubi Lake was so frightened by him was that he was just an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei. Once he left the city of Wei and entered the wilderness, he was a thief on horseback. Ning Kai and his comrades in the city of Wei were horse gang members, the most ferocious kind of horse gang. In those years, he had killed countless horse gang members. If it was at that time, with a world-famous female talisman master behind him, he might have stayed to deal with the horse gang for a while. But not today. Because he was a little uneasy. It was not because there were too many horse gang members, nor was it because of the cruel and passive situation. It was because he always felt that someone was watching him, and that person had been watching him for a long time. Not one day, not 2 days, but many days. At the highest point of the meadow in the east, a dozen horse gang members stood quietly, looking down at the chaotic battlefield. Most of the dozen horse gang members arrived last night, and they were the ones who attracted Ning Kai's attention. Different from the ordinary horse gang members, they all covered their faces with cloth, as if they did not want others to see their faces. It was obvious that these dozen horse gang members were the leaders of the 600 horse gang members. However, for some unknown reason, the horse gang members kept dying in the valley. Whether they were killed by the Yen cavalry or crushed to death by falling horses, they remained calm. When the burning fire talisman in the camp of the grain team was ignited, most of the dozen horse gang members finally showed shock in their eyes. However, the leader of the horse gang at the front remained absolutely calm. This horse gang leader's eyes were full of vicissitudes, and he was obviously middle-aged. There is indeed a very powerful talisman master in the grain team. Maybe it really is that young talisman master. The disciples of Black Ink Garden are indeed the disciples of the master of calligrapher. Their sword aura is really powerful. The horse gang leader said coldly, but after so many days, even the legendary calligraphy addict's psyche power must be drained. Let the people below prepare to continue the attack. The continuous attack for several days and nights was to drain the psyche power of the young talisman master hidden in the grain team. This leader's plan seemed to be very patient, and now he did not hesitate to let his subordinates use their lives to drain the last of the psyche power of the young talisman master, showing his cold-blooded ruthlessness. Feeling the hesitation of his subordinates, the leader frowned slightly and said coldly, "The Central Plains Coalition Army and the palace are negotiating for peace. Other than the desolate man, the most unlucky ones are your horse gang members. Kill the people we should kill to stop this negotiation. For this goal, it is worth it no matter how many people die." A subordinate said in confusion, "The Palace Chanyu and the Divine Hall will not be fooled by such an obvious trick." The leader said coldly, "What we want is the truth. The truth is more powerful than any other words. As long as we kill these people below, there is no way for this negotiation to continue." The riders on the meadow thought of the bigwig and immediately understood the meaning of the leader's words. The leader looked at a place in the camp and said, "Continue the attack. If the person on the black horse tries to escape from the camp, it is time for us to do it ourselves. Remember, we must ensure that that person is killed in this operation." The riders only knew that the person the leader was talking about was a male disciple of the Black Ink Garden who had previously shown extremely powerful strength. But they did not know the person's real identity, so they were very confused and thought that if they wanted to cause enough shock in the wilderness, The first goal should be to kill the young talisman master in the horse carriage. A horse gang member behind the leader hesitated for a moment, and then he plucked up his courage and said, "Your Excellency, the casualties of our subordinates are too heavy. We really can't fight anymore. If we continue to force them, I am afraid that these guys will collapse." This title was very strange. It did not seem like a title among horse gangs, but more like an official title. The horse gang leader glanced at him lightly and said, "If you can't command these horse gangs after leading them in the wilderness for nearly 10 years, then what is the use of you living?" The horse gang member felt a chill all over under his gaze and did not dare to say another word. The horse gang leader looked at the camp below and said emotionlessly, "These horse gangs don't know their identity and always think that they are real horse gangs. But you can't forget your identity. Thieves on the horse, soldiers off the horse. And you are the soldiers of the general." Hearing these words, the meadow fell silent. After a long time, someone finally asked, "Your Excellency, how to deal with the young talisman master in the carriage? No matter how strong the calligraphy addict is, she has not entered the knowing destiny state. Once her psyche power is exhausted, how is she different from an ordinary person? And even if she still has the strength to fight, can she stop us from killing that young man?" Since the beginning of the battle, more than 10 cavalrymen who had been quietly standing on the top of the meadow dispersed and gathered their subordinates. They began to prepare for the last and most powerful attack, leaving only the horse gang leader there. The horse gang leader raised his right hand and pressed his bamboo hat lower. He quietly looked at the young man in the black ink garden uniform in the camp below, who was covered in blood with knives and arrows on his back. After a long time of silence, he smiled with mixed feelings. From last year in Chang unto this moment, he had been secretly watching this man called Ning Ke for a long time. Although he had never found any evidence to prove that Ning Ke was related to the death of the censor Zhang Yuqi, nor did he find that this man was hostile to the general, he did not know why he always felt that this man would be trouble. Because Ning Ke was a suspect, and because Ning Ke had now entered the second floor of the academy, became the only successor of the divine talisman Master Yen Sei, and was also favored by His Majesty. Therefore, even if there was only one suspicion, they still needed to be very vigilant. Especially when Ning Ke came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yen Kingdom, no one knew whether he had secretly received the imperial order or not, and no one knew the deep meaning of the Academy's action. Therefore, trouble became pressure, and it was meaningless to be suspicious. There was no need to investigate whether this man was involved in the death of the censor, and there was no need to investigate whether this man was secretly against the general. They could only and must do one thing, and that was to eliminate the possible threat for the general. Thinking of this, the horse gang leader's complicated smile gradually disappeared. If it were any other time and place, no one would dare to murder a disciple of the second floor of the academy in broad daylight. But now they were in the wilderness, and no one knew the relationship between these horse gang and the general. The imperial court had already suspected the general, and this group of horse gang had to be cleaned up sooner or later. Today, killing Ning Ke, destroying the peace talks, and wiping out this group of horse gang was a wonderful thing. Therefore, when the news of Ning Ke leaving the Blue Water Battalion in disguise and escorting the grain team into the wilderness with the disciples of Black Ink Garden reached the general's mansion, he spared no effort and did not sleep for several days and nights to rush here from Tuyang City to personally take charge of this matter. This was a good opportunity given by Haotian. If he missed it, he would be punished by heaven. However, just when the horse gang was about to launch another attack, Ning Ke was ready to ride away, and the horse gang leader was ready to take advantage of the situation to kill him. There was a burst of dense hoofbeats in the distance of the wilderness meadow. The disciples of Black Ink Garden and the Yen Kingdom soldiers who were vigilantly preparing for battle in the camp under the meadow, and the horse gang who were ready to charge between the meadow and the gentle slope of the meadow, all stopped their respective movements and looked towards the source of the hoofbeats. A group of cavalry came from the meadow in the west. There were not many people in this group of cavalry, about 100. However, both the cavalrymen and the horses under them were wearing gorgeous black armors with golden edges. They looked solemn and imposing, as if there were tens of thousands of cavalry coming together. It was the papal cavalry troop of Divine Hall, known as the strongest cavalry in the world. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers under the meadow. The horse gang quickly retreated and lined up, ready to retreat. However, what happened next was out of everyone's expectation. An old hand stretched out from a carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. The 100 cavalrymen of Divine Hall slowly stopped and looked at this side indifferently from thousands of feet away. They did not immediately attack the horse gang. People in the camp of the grain team looked at that side in astonishment. The cheers gradually subsided and became dead silent. Some people guessed the intention of this group of cavalrymen of Divine Hall, and their faces showed a look of disbelief and indignation. I didn't stop writing. I wrote 12,000 words today. The task on Tuesday is finished. Oh, I only need to write 8,000 words tomorrow. How happy I am! To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.